this. Bring it back up. Here we go. And it's back. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. If you're watching over on, some of the YouTube channels, Odyssey and Twitch, and I think one Rumble channel as well. We lost our feed again because of an internet issue here, a second night in a row. So I apologize, but the feed has been reestablished, and we are back on the air live over there. So there is all of that. Again, stay tuned here, folks, because we will have Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, and Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Dimitry Polyanskiy, joining us shortly here on the Maverick News Channel. But right now we are talking about this actors' strike, which takes effect tomorrow in Hollywood. The Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, representing the major studios and streaming services, including Paramount, also released a statement responding to the strike. They expressed that the strike was the union's choice, not theirs. The group highlighted their offer, they said, in this statement, and went on to say, which included historic pay and residual increases, higher caps on pension and health contributions, audition protections, shortened series option periods, and a groundbreaking AI proposal protecting actors' digital likenesses. Two versions of the story coming out. We'll have to see what happens once they actually have an agreement, where that all ends up. So Disney chief Bob Iger, who recently extended his contract by 2 years, voiced concerns over the potential strike. He says, in his words, that there's a level of expectation that SAG-AFTRA and the WGA have that is just not realistic. He goes on to say, again, these are his words, the strike would have a very damaging effect on the whole industry. News, let me see here. More on this news story. SAG-AFTRA represents 160,000 screen actors, broadcast journalists. Used to be there, not so much anymore. Now we're independent. Announcers, hosts, and stunt performers. And I guess the strike is getting support from other unions, other performers, including Broadway actors tonight. They also issued a statement declaring solidarity with SAG-AFTRA workers. So this is a very interesting story, to say the least. It is historic. It's one of the first labor disputes that directly is the direct result of artificial intelligence technology and its impact on an industry. And the fact that it's affecting actors is also groundbreaking, precedent setting. It will be precedent setting, I think. It'll potentially pave the way for agreements in other industries with people in all kinds of other industries, lawyers, doctors, white collar workers who up until now have never really been affected in a negative way, in the same way that blue collar workers have been throughout history. Farmers, even the agricultural industry, huge disruptive technology occurrences throughout the history of those industries, factory workers. But now, artificial intelligence can probably quite easily put a lawyer out of business in the very near future. I think they're almost there now. Even accountants. You just put the right information in, it'll spit the right result out. Artists, we're already seeing the impact there. And that's exactly what's happening in Hollywood tonight. Wow. The ethics, the morals, the questions surrounding all of this. We're in for a rough ride over the next number of years. Who knows where we're going to end up with this? What will be the upside? I don't know. I guess it will create other new jobs for people with technical knowledge, computer programmers, but eventually AI will take over from them too. You might not need a computer programmer because AI will just do it for us. Is there any job that is safe? Makes you begin to question everything, doesn't it? Maybe we need to put the brakes on, slow down just a little bit, and assess. Stay with me.
Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Does life influence art, or does art influence life? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Are there any coincidences in politics? Do campaign videos reflect the current state of the political landscape? Or is the political landscape created through psychological operations and information warfare in order to fit a narrative so that that's then reinforced with a video that I'm about, the kind of video that I'm about to show you right now? Which way does it work? Or does it work both ways? Specifically, all this attention focused right now on the LGBTQS plus drag queen story time issues, all of that stuff. Is that all happening right now because there's choreography in play, and then the politicians are responding to that choreography, but or capitalizing on it? Or did it all happen organically? I don't know. But it all seems like it's all just too conveniently fitting together, or whatever. Ron DeSantis, there's a new campaign video out there, and it's powerful, extremely well produced, and it hits on all those hot button issues, the things that really get people jacked up. I know for a fact, and I've seen reports about this that have not been widely distributed, that polling has been done by particularly conservative political groups over the past couple of years. to determine which issues they really need to focus on in terms of their campaign rhetoric. And that is one of the hot issues. It's always been there on the conservative side as an issue that they can really kind of rally the troops behind. And that's partly because there's, a strong church base, evangelical base, Christian base, even Catholic base, church base. And then outside of that, you've got, conservative people with conservative values, families. So it's always been an issue. Rush Limbaugh, for as long as I ever was aware of Rush Limbaugh, and that was a long time, he would talk about these issues too. And that's what DeSantis is doing with this new campaign video. The people supporting him, Mamas for DeSantis. Family values, traditional values, Christian values, concerns about all of the LGBTQ drag queen storytime stuff. Let's watch the video. As I say, it's powerful stuff, and I think it's going to set the trend. And he may, in a way, he's kind of stealing this away from the Trump campaign. He's coming out strong with this one. Let's take a look, and again, you guys can assess for yourselves. Mamas for DeSantis.
In America, we've witnessed a lot and put up with enough.
You guys gotta go. He is arresting her for being on a public playground. Her kids are here. What are you?
We've been forced into silence. Into compliance. Told that we must trust the science.
Indoor and outdoor venues should be closed.
We've been told that we must deny truth, back down, and look the other way. But enough is enough. When you come after our kids, we fight back, because there's nothing we won't do to protect our children. They're not yours.
These are our kids.
Our nation's children are all our children.
We will not allow you to exploit their innocence to advance your agenda. We are no longer silent. We are united, and we have finally found our fighter.
We're not going to let you impose an agenda on our kids. We're going to stand up for our kids.
He'll do for America what he did for us in Florida. Schools open. Parents' rights defended. School choice universal. Critical race theory prohibited. DEI stopped. Child mutilation illegal. Girls' sports saved. Communities protected. Our economy growing. And freedom guaranteed. But winning the fight in Florida is just the beginning. We must protect parents' rights and the innocence of our children. We must restore sanity in our society. We need every mama and every grandmama in every corner of the country to stand up and fight back by electing Ron DeSantis President of the United States of America. Join us by texting mamas to 512345.
Pretty powerful, timely, ties right into everything going on right now. We see daily protests, conflicts in the streets. We see we're talking about the Hollywood strike. And yet, what's the number one movie in the country right now? I'm sorry. It slips my mind. Anyway, you're getting the picture. So the question is, what came first? Is this a response to everything going on, or were the conditions created for this, or was it a combination of both? Anyway, let's take a brief break, and I'll be right back while I gather my thoughts and overcome my distractions with all the technical stuff going on here. Scott Ritter and Dimitry Polyanskiy will be along shortly to join us on the broadcast. Don't go away.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Sound of Freedom. That's the movie. And there's passion around that. It's political passion, though. No question in my mind about that. Passion that that the producers are taking to the bank. That's for sure. And it's fueling the hang on, just I don't know. Somebody's messaging me. And let me take another brief break while I deal with these things. There's some technical thing going on or something. So again, stay with me. I'll be right back. I'll fix whatever this is, and we'll be just about ready to bring our guests in for the evening. So don't go away.
Fear not the storm, for truth is on our side. Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals. Defenders of individual rights and freedoms. Credible. Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, I'm back. So while Hollywood is going on about strike and AI is at the center of the labor dispute, Elon Musk is launching his artificial intelligence company called XAI. And he's vowing to develop a generative AI program that competes with established offerings like ChatGPT. So this company, Elon Musk's company, employs some engineers who used to work for major companies in the field like Google and OpenAI. And Musk has, been critical of the pace and the ambitions of recent developments in artificial intelligence. And as we've seen in various interviews, he's indicated he's been reluctant to get into this end of the industry. But he says if he could press pause on advanced artificial intelligent digital superintelligence, he says he would, but he says it doesn't seem like that's realistic. So he doesn't have any choice but to get into this deeper. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. Now, some people are messaging me saying that there's some issues with our donation page. I just clicked on it. I don't see any issues with it. I'll just, bring this up. If you want to support the show and you want us to continue to bring you content like we're bringing you tonight, you can donate at freedomreporters.com. That's freedomreporters.com. If that is an issue, if there's a problem there is another page you can go to, maverickdonations.com. That's a Give, Send, Go account. The other one is PayPal. You can also donate through the Rumble rants on the Rumble channel that we're on. Please consider subscribing over on Rumble. That's the free speech platform. Yeah, we're growing on YouTube as well, but we've been demonetized there. They keep, they just play their censorship games on YouTube, and we're right now on a temporary ban over on Facebook, which I don't think was warranted at all, but my opinion. I'm biased, obviously, but it's just a little tiresome. And I see in the back room now, we have my lovely co-host. There she is. Are you ready for being on camera, or do you want me to leave you in the back room for a few minutes? I can't hear you. That's exactly it. Okay, so I'm going to take you out because she's still getting ready. There's Lori, and she's getting all fired up and ready to rock and roll with Scott Ritter, who's going to be along just momentarily, and Dimitry Polyanskiy. So there's all that. Let's go to the chat and just see what we've got going on in here tonight while we wait for our guests to arrive. I haven't really had a chance to look and see what's going on in here with our audience tonight, our Maverick family. Please, folks, consider subscribing. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, please make sure you hit the notification bell. We will be back on Facebook. I have a plan in place that will allow us to return to broadcasting over there as well. But please consider subscribing over on Rumble as well. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, hit the notification bell. That'll make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And what are the comments in here? Mike says we're going to have a robot war now. Sandy says that sounds like fake news to me. I guess she's referring to the stories I've been covering, especially about artificial intelligence tonight. Oh, and then here's Wilson. He says many of the Templars carried over to other orders, but the Templars themselves were only given one refuge after the Friday the 13th, where they were given a chance to thrive. That's obviously an offshoot comment from what I was talking about earlier about the Knights of Malta. BOC Tune says, I think I came across some conspiracy gold. BS hilarious. I don't know what that means. Here's Mouth of the South. 700 watching here. 165 on Rumble. Yep. Yeah, big audience tonight. Yeah, Alicia says PayPal is the best. Never no issues. Yeah, I've never had any issues with PayPal. I know that some people have. My experience with that has been that sometimes they don't leave enough money in the account to cover chargebacks and things like that, or they try to do other things to get money out prematurely and just some other issues, and it leads to problems over there. But I've never had any trouble myself with PayPal, ever. But that's me. Yeah, and William says, if I got a ban, you must have done something right, not wrong. True. That's very true. I wear it like a badge of honor. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been pretty clear. There were some very particular stories that we were covering, and I think they were uncomfortable with them. and didn't even understand them. We did a whole thing about spiritual warfare, and we had people on here reading passages from the Bible, and that got us banned. So yeah, the Bible will get you banned these days. I'm not really terribly, anyway, it doesn't matter. I just have to laugh about it. The Bible's getting people banned. And Gina says, thanks for being here. Hit the like. Yes, I agree. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the program tonight, especially new viewers, because we have a lot of people from all over the world watching. A big audience tonight. And Rob Zombie says, where'd you go there, Rob? Oh, they're flying by so fast I can barely make this out. Are you embedded bot news media, Rick? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, guys, I'm going to dump out of this for a minute. It's just about time to bring in our guests. So let me run another quick, go to another quick break here. And when we come back, it'll be time to get things rolling. I think the guests are in the back room now. So stay with me. They're coming right up. Don't go away.
Hello, world. Are you awake? Uniting humankind by liberating millions of minds at a time. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, I'm back, and joining us now, I hope she's ready because I'm bringing you in whether you like it or not. There you are.
Ready. So ready for this. My microphone apparently was not. So that's why you couldn't hear me earlier. We're just having all kinds of technical problems today.
Yes. Well, I was able to reestablish the feed over to those other YouTube channels and things. I've been having internet issues here the last couple of days.
Yeah,
but it's all back. It's up and running. I can see it.
Perfect. Now, if YouTube doesn't censor us, we're good to go.
Yes.
And if they do censor us, because they often do, I hope you guys are watching on Rumble or Twitter or one of the non-censorship platforms. That's where you ought to be. Why are you still on YouTube anyway?
Old habits die hard for people.
Yeah, that's it. It's a habit. And, to be honest, the YouTube app is just superior to the Rumble app for the viewing experience, for the chatting experience. I know a lot of people just like to be in the chat room during the show, and YouTube's got the best chat. So I think that's why most people still watch YouTube, unfortunately. But if the stream goes down, and sometimes it does, we'll see you on Rumble.
Yes. Yeah. But we're surviving, and that's what it's all about, survival in this business. So.
As a matter of fact, Bobby Kennedy will be testifying before the House on the 20th. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't. Fill us
about censorship. Yeah, about online censorship. So,
well, he has experience with that because they've certainly done their best to censor him.
And us, everybody who talks about him, we get censored too.
That's right.
It's not just Bobby getting hurt. It's independent creators and journalists like us who are just trying to do our jobs. And we're reporting on a presidential candidate. I think that's kind of newsworthy. Don't you?
Yes. What I find really weird, though, is that they kicked Trump off social media. And now, just as we're coming back online for another presidential election, even though he's facing all these legal challenges, they're letting him come back. And it looks like he's going to have a presence on social media again. If I was a conspiracy theorist.
But you're not, right?
No, not at all. Anyway, we have at least one of our guests in the back room. Should we bring him in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's
bring Scotty in.
Okay. Scotty boy.
Scotty boy.
Hello, welcome back.
How you doing, Rick? How you doing, Lori?
Very well. Great. Now that you're here, I don't know where Dimitry is. He may be delayed somewhat.
Well, he is a serving ambassador. of a Security Council permanent member in a time of perpetual global crisis. So I would imagine that he might be a little bit busy. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell you what, I'm going to let you two chat for a minute, and I'll check on Dimitry and see if he's having any technical problems on his end.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
Well,
right
I'm really grateful for you joining us on the program tonight, Scott, because there's just so much ground to cover, especially after the 2-day NATO summit. There's so much ground to cover there. And I guess my first question to you would be, what is your assessment of what happened there with regard to their decision to not let Ukraine have full membership in NATO?
Well, they were never going to let Ukraine have full membership in NATO. Ukraine didn't expect to have full membership in NATO. There's not a single nation out there that thought that that was a good idea, and B, plausible or possible. Understand that Ukraine is a nation at war. And Article 5, if you're a NATO member and you are at war, especially if somebody is alleged to have committed aggression against you, then NATO is compelled to consider coming to your assistance. I mean, I've read Article 5. It doesn't make it requirement, but I think Joe Biden has articulated that the United States would, and if the United States does, I believe other nations would come to the assistance of Ukraine, which would put NATO at war with Russia, which means nuclear war and everybody dies. And so, even though I think half the political leadership of NATO countries are populated by people who have lost their senses, I don't believe them to be suicidal. And so this was never a possibility. What Ukraine wanted was a well-articulated timetable of membership. Ukraine believes that it has done everything NATO has asked it to do, up to and including carrying out a suicidal offensive against prepared Russian defenses. Now, the hope was that Ukraine would have achieved some sort of discernible progress on the battlefield, then maybe put Russia back on its heels, and would allow NATO to use that as a vehicle to pressure Russia into a settlement to the conflict. And what Ukraine wanted is one.
Oh, we lost his feed. He bumped off there. I don't know where Scott went, but I'm sure he'll be back. Again, another technical glitch. This is very strange, to say the least.
Weird. That's really
Very
weird.
weird.
Rick. I don't
2
want to
nights
sound
of this
like
stuff, man. I'm telling you, like, again,
yeah,
if I was a
yeah.
conspiracy theorist, like
I'm just
cutting the
saying.
feed, and there was another. It was not just
Saturday
Yes,
when we
that's right,
did
same
Strange
darn thing.
Bedfellows. We had a guest from Russia. We had Russell Texas Bentley there in Donetsk, and our feed got cut in the middle of the broadcast. We had to start all over again, lost a ton of viewers. And I know it's confusing for the viewers out there when you're watching a stream and then the screen goes black and you're like, what happened? And
Yeah.
we're still sitting
Here
here
he is.
talking.
back.
And I
He's
think
back.
Scott is back.
I have no idea what just happened there. I was talking and my computer did a hiccup and
Mm,
you disappeared. So maybe the people who are listening in took umbrage at something I said. But
Everyone out there, be sure to say hello in the chat to the FBI and the CIA and the NSA.
And
Say hi.
CSIS here in Canada. Hey,
Yeah.
the
gang's all
Royal
here.
Canadian Mounted Police.
RCMP, good evening.
But
Nice you're here. Glad to have you.
no, I just think that to finish what I was saying, Ukraine was looking for a timetable of membership. They have done what they have been asked to do, and Zelensky, rightly so. I'm not a big fan of Zelensky, but I mean, you got to fair is fair. If you do what NATO says you need to do, then NATO needs to pony up. But NATO wasn't going to pony up. This, I think, is the great awakening for Ukraine, because up until now, I think Zelensky might have been holding out that NATO actually is on the side of Ukraine, that NATO is actually fighting for Ukraine and such. And the reality is that Ukraine as a tool being used by NATO. This is the manifestation of an approach that I think was first articulated in 1993 by George Soros in an article he wrote that talked about the future of NATO, and he said that the NATO as a military alliance needs an enemy. And at the end of the Cold War, everybody was viewing the Russians as potential friends. And Soros said, no, the Russians will never be friends. The Russians will always be the enemy. We need to have an enemy so that we can justify our continued existence and increase military budgets. But he also said that while the ultimate goal would be a conflict that brings pain to Russia, it couldn't be a conflict that involved NATO, because that would bring body bags home. NATO. And Soros rightly said, there's not a NATO country out there right now that's going to be a big fan of large numbers of body bags coming home. So the key, and this is a direct quote for him, the key was for NATO to identify Eastern European sources of manpower that could be appended with NATO technology and then used to inflict pain on Russia. This is 1993 that he said this. And if you take a look at what's happening today, NATO has found an Eastern European source of manpower, Ukraine. They've appended it with NATO technology, and they're trying to inflict pain on Russia. That's all Ukraine is good for. Ukraine is not good for anything else. Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, ever. Even if they were to win this conflict, which they won't, they will never be a member of NATO because NATO doesn't want them to be a member. Ukraine is a very corrupt nation with a perverse sense of nationalistic ideology that runs counter to pretty much everything the European Union stands for. It's not a democracy. It's an oligarchy, and they just don't belong in Europe. But they are a source of Eastern European manpower, and they're being used as such. And I think this is the wake-up call to Zelensky. I think he understands what happened here and what his role is. And unfortunately, right now, the only thing he can do is because he can't sue for peace with Russia. He's too far in. So all he can do is die. That's all that can happen to Ukraine right now. That's the sad, tragic reality of this. There will not be a negotiated peace. I wish Dimitry was here. I'd like to hear his take on this, but
he's on his way. I'm told he's on his way.
My understanding is that that Russia has decided that from the political side of the resolution of this conflict requires the termination of the Zelensky government, replacement with something that is definitely more pro-Russian than not, and a process extended, if necessary, of denazification, which means purging Ukraine of, Stepan Bandera-driven ideology. Stepan Bandera needs to become treated like Adolf Hitler is treated in Germany, not a hero, but a pariah, something to be condemned, but embraced. And then the reality is that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Now, what form Ukraine takes is another question, too. There's increasing pressure coming from within Russia that areas that are historically Russian, like Odessa, with extensive, ethnic Russian populations, cities like Kharkov, they can't be part of Ukraine when this conflict is over. Now, Putin has not articulated this. This is not official Russian policy. But if you listen to what Putin has said, he said, we will regain control of all of Russia. And that means all of Kherson, including the right bank, all of Zaporizhia, all of Lugansk, all of Donetsk. Crimea is already theirs. And then he said, we will push the Ukrainians back to the maximum range of the longest range system NATO has provided, which in this case is HIMARS, which means that you're going to be pushed back 150 kilometers. Now, if you take a simple compass, the old protractors that you had in high school, and go to a map of Ukraine and go down to the, to the scale and take the pointy end and take the pencil and get it down to 150 kilometers, then go along the border and do your arcs. Tell me where the circles are. Odessa is within the arc. Kharkov is within the arc. That means that Russia is going to occupy these cities. And once Russia occupies Odessa, they will never give it back to the Ukrainians. That's a guarantee. Once Russia occupies Odessa, it will never be returned to the Ukrainians. So Ukraine may look very, very different than it looks right now when this conflict is over. Dimitry Medvedev, who is a very hardliner, and I sometimes, I caution people to take his words with a grain of salt because I think his job sometimes is to stir up controversy. But he is the deputy chairman of the National Security Council. He's not somebody to be trifled with. And he has basically said that it's unlikely Ukraine will exist when this war is over.
You know what this reminds me of, Scott? And you're a student of history, so I wanted to ask your thoughts on this as well. The question of Ukraine getting NATO membership, it reminds me very much of during World War II, when the Ukrainians were fighting for Nazi Germany under the promise that wasn't exactly a promise, that at the end of the war, if they helped the Nazis, they would become an independent country, independent from the Soviet Union. And that was not really a promise made by Hitler, but some of his top dogs were whispering that in the Ukrainians' ear. If you just keep fighting for us, keep dying for us, we'll make you independent, but not now, only at the end of the war. Your thoughts?
Look, on the one hand I'm probably going to get a lot of people angry when I say this, so don't take it wrong, but I'm an American nationalist. I love my country. I'm American as you can get, red, white, and blue. I will die for my country. I will fight for my country. I will defend my country against all enemies. So I'm sympathetic to people who say, I'm a nationalist. I believe in my country. I believe in this. The problem with Ukraine, though, is what is Ukraine? Because I can tell you that a Ukrainian nationalist from West Ukraine has a different vision of Ukraine than an ethnic Russian Ukrainian nationalist from Mariupol. So, we struggle with a definition of what Ukraine is. Even the Ukrainians themselves, when they started, they weren't, remember, Donbass was not Ukraine during the Second World War. Just keep that in mind. Donbass was Russian, and Crimea was Russian. So what constituted Ukraine is Ukraine is a nation in flux, and even the parts of Ukraine that existed. Remember, Western Ukraine was not Ukraine until 1941 or 39 or 39 when the Russians came in and took it over, and it got incorporated. But my point is, it's been in a flux. The Banderists don't care about Eastern Ukraine. They don't care. They hate the Russians. They don't have anything to do with the Russians. The Banderists are all about Western Ukraine in that area. That's where, we just had the 80th anniversary of the Volyn massacre. Look where the Volyn massacre took place, in the West, not in the East. So what is a Ukrainian nationalist? That's the, one of the problems I have. And when people, because some people will say, you can't condemn a Ukrainian for fighting for Ukraine. And I would reply, I don't, which is why I don't condemn the ethnic Russians who stood up against the coup that took place in February 2014, CIA-backed coup, to get rid of the constitutionally elected government headed by Viktor Yanukovych. Those are Ukrainian patriots. Those are the only real patriots. They're not the traitors that came in with CIA backing to elevate, the Banderist ideology into the mainstream. These are Ukrainian patriots that said, no, we believe in the constitutional government. That's me. That's who I am. If somebody overthrows my government in Washington, D.C. in an unconstitutional manner, I'll be the first one on the front line to defend the Constitution, to defend the constitutionality, to defend the republic, because that's what I took an oath to. And I think the real patriots are the ethnic Russians who stood up and said, no, we're not going to let this happen. So what, it's a struggle to find out, how we're going to define Ukraine. I mean, Vladimir Putin gave it a shot. If you remember, on the eve of the incursion back in February, Vladimir Putin gave a very long speech, and in the West, everybody just poo-pooed it. I listened to it, and my Russian is pretty bad, so I listened to it while I was trying to read a transcript. I always like to listen to it because I want to hear the inflection of the voice. I want to hear, because that tells a lot about the emotion. And
see the
Putin doesn't give too much away. He's very good, but his voice does. If you've been listening to his speeches over time, his voice is a tell, and his eyes, as you said, are a tell. And if you look at the two, he reveals things about himself, which is pretty cool. Because otherwise he's a closed book. He's hard. He's a tough read.
He's got a good poker face.
I wouldn't want to play poker against Vladimir Putin, but he gave this speech, and when I read it, and then I have to tell you, it confused me, because it was long, and it was complicated, and it put in a lot of facts. But then what I did is I took the time to actually take it apart piece by piece and do the research into it. And the knee-jerk reaction of all the anti-Russian, anti-Putin people were, this is just Russian propaganda. And I'm like, but actually it's not. You see, what he said here is actually
means what he says.
It's not just that he means, it's factually true.
Yeah.
When he says that Lenin did X, there's the document that says Lenin did X. Now, we can play historian and try and dig into the context of that. And if you feel that the document was, that there's a potential different contextual read to it, that's what historians do all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm in favor of that. I personally believe that Putin put a certain contextual spin on a lot of these documents to make it coincide with what he was doing. I'm not saying that that's dishonest. That's what historians do. I'm a historian. I go in and I read documents. I have a thesis, and I will read a document and say it can be interpreted this way. Now, in my footnote, I will also say it could be interpreted this way as well. So because you got to have integrity, you got to have honesty. But Putin did it. But there's nowhere did he make up a fact. Nowhere did he just cook something up out of the blue. And the more I go back, because I've gone back and read that speech over and over and over again, and the more I read it, the more sympathetic I become to what Putin is saying in that. Not because I'm pro-Putin, I'm pro-fact, I'm pro-history, I'm pro-truth. I have gone out and bought books. I mean, Putin's speeches have cost me a lot of money, because oftentimes I have to go out and buy books to get better read on the subject, because I'm not somebody who's a prisoner of Google. I mean, I love Google. Google gives me, short-term, quick answers if I, Google it. I Google it. But I'm the kind of guy that likes to, someone challenged me once and said, what do you know about
in my hand,
Bandera?
Paper in my hand. I'm
So
old school.
I got my book on Bandera.
Oh,
And
look
the
at that.
beautiful thing about it is the footnotes. See, I'm an avid reader of footnotes. I go in and I look at the sources, and then I spend a lot of money going to buy the damn sources so I can read their footnotes. And I want to get it down to the point where I find the source document.
What book is that? Can you hold that up and let us see the cover? What is that book? I want it.
It's on Stepan Bandera.
I've seen that book before. Is it good?
It's very academic. It's not reading that's done to entertain, but it's just full of facts. All the facts are out there, and it lays out who Stepan Bandera is, what his organization was, what they did, and it cuts through all the BS, especially the Ukrainian nationalist BS that says he was a Ukrainian nationalist who did tough. He had to make tough calls.
Did what he had to do, right? It was a tough
I
call
mean,
working with Hitler, but he did what he had to do.
It's a tough call to go into Lvov and rape women
Slaughter all
and
those
murder
people.
them, and that's a tough call. It's a tough call to run through Volyn and take all the women and children of a village and put them into a church and light it on fire and laugh while they burn it. That's a tough call. I get it, guys. I don't get it. I hate them. But anyways, I've gone off.
I wanted to kind of bring you back to the original question, which was, do you believe that NATO is stringing Ukraine along, dangling that carrot in front of them in the same way that Nazi Germany dangled the carrot in front of Ukraine during World War II?
Yes, and we know. First of all, it's not what I think. We know it because Lloyd Austin, in a moment of a rare moment of honesty for him, back in May of 2022, came back from Kiev and he said that our goal is to bring Russia pain.
Yeah,
pain, and we're going to do that by empowering Ukraine to continue this fight. Lindsey Graham has said that we will continue this fight to the last Ukrainian. I mean, that's sort of a perverse way of saying that we don't care about Ukraine. No, we're using Ukraine. We're seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. We're not seeking the elevation of Ukraine. We're not seeking to make Ukraine, because let me just be as blunt as possible. If we cared about Ukraine, we would never have allowed this war to happen. This war could have been prevented from day one. It would have been in the best interest of Ukraine to declare its neutrality and to have prevented. I mean, I saw an estimate today from a source that I respect: 345,000 dead, to prevent 345,000 Ukrainian soldiers from dying. And there's other things going on too. People are talking about, here in the United States, and I'm sure Canada's had similar issues with returning veterans from combat zones, PTSD, the psychological trauma that's the cost that your combat veterans have. And we had 20 years of low intensity conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Yemen, Somalia and elsewhere. And we have veterans who are traumatized by that, rightfully so. I'm not denigrating them at all. But they experienced a moment of combat. What's going on right now, and General Cavoli, the commander, Supreme Allied Commander, a U.S. Army general, as commander of all U.S. forces in Europe, said back in January, speaking to a defense forum in Sweden, that the scope and scale of the violence that's taking place on the battlefield in Ukraine is beyond the imagination of NATO. NATO has never been able to imagine this. Now, that's an interesting thing, what he said, because if it's beyond the imagination, that means that when you are doing your planning, you're not planning for that. You're planning for something else. You're planning for 5,000 to 6,000 rounds of ammunition being pumped out a day by a core-sized element. And that's maximum sustained rate in an artillery-driven war. When the reality is the Russians are going to be coming back at you with 40 to 50,000 rounds. And then suddenly when you try to up it, you realize, well, we didn't plan for this, so we don't have enough ammunition, and we're going to run out of ammunition in a week, which is the reality if NATO ever goes to war. People need to understand that. Jan Stoltenberg sitting there talking about beefing up NATO forces. With what, Jan? With what, you idiot? Where are you going to get the tanks? Nobody can build the tanks. Where are you going to get the ammunition? You can't even supply Ukraine with ammunition, and now you're talking about building up this giant NATO army with what money? Collapsed economy of Great Britain from the collapsed economy of Germany. Both Sweden and Finland are going to rue the day they join NATO because it's going to bankrupt them, because they're going to be asked to do things. Again, going off a slight tangent here, interesting question from a Finnish journalist today, because Joe Biden was in Finland doing the Nordic summit. And they said, yeah, we joined NATO. But in America, you got people running for president who don't want to be part of NATO. What's the future of Finland when somebody who doesn't want to be part of NATO becomes president and America says, "Das Vidania," pulls out? Was it a mistake for us to join NATO given the political volatility of America?
Do you mind if I ask who they were referring to? Which presidential candidate?
Well, I would imagine that right now there's two on the horizon.
Uh-huh.
One who is
So they didn't
dominating,
say, right? They didn't say any name.
dominating polls for the Republicans, Donald Trump,
Yeah.
and the challenger in the Democratic Party, who's polling in a way I just laugh when I see. I love watching TV because I love watching these reporters who aren't reporters. They're supposed to be journalists, but they're not. They're advocates, and they just can't understand because they hate RFK Jr. They hate him with a passion because
With a
he dared challenge the COVID mandate. You can't challenge the COVID mandate. Brains will explode if you challenge the COVID mandate. But he challenged it, and it turns out that so far he's being proved right. So these journalists are just like, oh, and so they're like, we don't understand why this vaccine denier is suddenly doing so well against Biden. Well, he's doing well because Biden's a joke, because Biden's a loser, Biden's an idiot, Biden's a senile old man who has never been right on any national security issue in his entire career. And that's not Scott Ritter saying that, although I am saying it. That's Robert Gates saying it, that conservative Republican former assistant director of the CIA, former the Secretary of Defense. Robert Gates said Biden's an idiot, hasn't been right on anything. So that's
true fact.
RFK Jr. We're early on. You never want to call a race this soon, but I'll tell you what, he's raising money, and he's tapped into. And this is for once I heard a journalist say this. The journalist was like, yeah, but what you understand is that while we're up here saying this, and we, of course, believe we're right, there's a whole bunch of people out there, a whole bunch of people who disagree with us. They talked about
we must censor them.
We
must shut them up.
Well, you can't. We got to deplatform them, apparently. But the fact of the matter is that RFK Jr. is tapping into that. And not only that, but he's also getting mainstreamed because there's mainstream Democrats that are just like, no, but Biden, we can't do this anymore. And the other interesting thing is there's some Republicans that are like, I don't know if RFK Jr. would ever do this. I think he actually believes he can win the presidency on his own. He doesn't need to team up. But there's some people out there saying that if Trump picked RFK Jr. as his running mate, that's it. Game, set, match, because people would say, okay, we can hold our nose for 4 more years of Trump, but then we get 8 years of RFK Jr. and we'll get 12 years of consistent, policy line, meaning that, it's not going to be, Donald Trump for 4 years causing havoc and then running away and letting the establishment come back in and reassert itself. It'll be 12 years of redefining America, which would be awesome if that could happen. And so I think the people
Scott, have you seen the latest attacks on Robert Kennedy Jr.? Now they're doing to him what they did to you, to Tulsi Gabbard, and to President Trump. They're saying he's a Putin puppet and a Russian stooge and a propagandist for Russia. And since you've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, I was hoping you could respond. And if you had any advice for Bobby, if he's watching this broadcast tonight, what would you tell him? How would you advise him to handle those kinds of attacks?
Look, first of all, RFK Jr. has been around, for a while, and I don't think he needs advice from somebody like me. But I will.
But he does consult you quite a bit. He listens to you.
I've been on his podcast, and we may have had the odd phone call, but he's his own man. He's not beholden to me or anybody else. He has his own opinions, and they're strongly held opinions. But I will say this: he's somebody who is very attentive to the facts, and he's somebody who runs these facts through an analytical algorithm that is defined by his uncle's life experience. Right. So if you're somebody who was a fan of Camelot, you're somebody who believed that JFK was, a president worthy of admiration, whose life was and tenure in office was cut short tragically. Understand that while RFK Jr. isn't JFK, he's the closest damn thing there is out there to JFK. He's somebody who has absorbed his uncle and his father, absorbed their integrity, their approach, their sense of patriotism is patriotism that's defined by principle, not by power. He's somebody who believes that America should lead by example, principled example, not by simply threatening people. And on Russia, I think he'll be the first one. I mean, look, I'll tell you, when I hear him call Putin a thug, and when I hear him, say that, Russia, carried out a war of aggression.
Not very diplomatic.
Well, I don't care about that. I personally think that I think he's wrong on that. But you know what? That's okay because it's not a sin to be wrong. What the sin is when you refuse to absorb information and adapt your analysis and your conclusions. Look, he's a politician. Now, he's not your typical politician, but he's in a political game right now. So he can't take too many unpopular positions hard. So let's look what he did with Russia. To call him a Putin stooge, he just called Putin a thug.
Yeah.
So how can you say he's a stooge?
Square that.
And he's a shill for Russia. He said Russia, it carried out a war of aggression against Ukraine.
Yep.
And he said my sympathies are with the Ukrainians on this. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. Those are three things that definitely guarantee that he's not, singing off of a Russian, script. But then he turns around and he has absorbed facts. For instance, he is one of the few politicians that takes a long, hard look at NATO expansion and the role that NATO expansion played in creating this conflict. And he's on the right side of history there. He's called out NATO expansion. And he's also somebody who has called out Minsk and what Merkel and Hollande and Poroshenko did, using Minsk as a sham to build up. So he's called that out. And so what his position is right now is that this war needs to come to an end. And talk of pushing Russia back, pushing Russia out is absurd. That we need to end this conflict along the lines that are currently dictated by reality, and then move forward in peace, especially if Ukraine wants to survive as a nation. This is an evolving position, and first of all, I think we also have to understand that RFK Jr. has he's as human as we all are. And he has a son that fought in Ukraine on the side of the Ukrainians.
Yeah, his son Connor. Connor fought over there for a while.
And he's proud of his son.
Sure.
And he's not going to abandon his son. He's not going to run. And as a parent, I find that to be admirable. And so, here's a guy that is putting himself on the national stage where everything you do is put under a microscope. And he's taking on the hardest issue, one of the hardest issues out there. And he's doing it with integrity, and he's doing it with humanity. And I cut him a whole bunch of slack. Could I be, for want of a better word, an asshole and pick apart Bobby Kennedy wherever I disagree with him? Sure. But then how positive and constructive is that? I look at Bobby Kennedy and I see a man that can lead this country in the right direction. And that's the most important thing.
I do too. And full disclosure, I have to tell everyone that I'm a volunteer recruiter on the Kennedy 24 campaign, so I'm a little biased. But what I really like to see, Scott, is that when Bobby wants an answer to a question that's in his curious mind, and he has a very curious mind, it's one of his best qualities, he calls you. Like after the Wagner revolt last month, you were one of the first people he called, and he just wanted to get your take on things, and I like that. I hope that continues, and I sleep better at night knowing that he's talking to you.
I'll keep the conversations, if I have any conversation with Bobby, private, because unless Bobby wants to talk about him, I don't think they should.
But he did do
I'm
a
not-
podcast with you. They did a bit. Of
No, he did, and we
tournament
discussed Wagner on the podcast. And I'm not going to lie and say that we haven't talked on the phone. I'm just going to say that whatever we talked about is between me and RFK and he Junior. And if he,
Let me
if
ask
he,
you this:
go ahead.
Do you have any other presidential candidates calling you for your input or advice?
None that have declared.
There you go. I rest my
Shall
case.
we bring in our other guest? He is in the back room.
Oh, there he is. Yes.
Yes.
Hello, Ambassador Polyanskiy. Everyone, please meet
Oh,
Russian Federation UN Ambassador Dimitry Polyanskiy, our good friend here at Maverick News. Welcome back to the show, Ambassador.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Scott. Glad to see you
thank you
online.
for coming back.
And
Yeah.
this is the first time Scott and Dimitri have actually met. Is that right?
I hope not the last. And I hope
Good.
to meet you in person. I have heard a lot of you and about you, and I admire your energy and your passion in telling the right things to the audience, which is a very rare case right now.
Well, thank you very much. And I respect the work you're doing. I spent a number of years in the United Nations environment, and I've experienced the Security Council at its best and its worst. And I think nothing I experience can match what you're going through today. It's just an unreal situation. So I salute your effort to make diplomacy real as opposed to what others are trying to accomplish. So.
Thank you for your words. I can tell you that my work in Security Council can be easily divided into 3 stages. So I came 5.5 years ago, and initially it was one period. Then came COVID, which absolutely changed our life, and we all went online. And then this Ukrainian crisis. And after the Ukrainian crisis, everything that we faced in the Security Council, you can forget about it. So it's a new setting, it's a new situation, and it's a new challenges that we face. It's really another life, a new life. So 3 clear stages of staying here.
Gentlemen, I'd like to start with a question here at the top about the NATO summit that just concluded. It's a burning question on my mind, and I'm sure many Americans and Canadians have the same question. And that is Russia's response, because, of course, during the summit, Russia is not included in the conversation, doesn't get a chance to respond. And the Kremlin put out a response saying that the latest NATO summit demonstrates that the Western military alliance has returned to Cold War schemes. That's a quote. And I agree with that. And Moscow says they're ready to respond to such threats by, quote, all means necessary. So, Dimitry, as a diplomat, could you please translate that into diplomatic language that we can understand? What does all means necessary actually mean?
Well, that means that we are a sovereign country. We were not threatening anyone. We were just trying to get our place under the sun and to get from the Western countries the things that we were promised quite a long time ago in the 90s. You know that there was one perception of the world that was agreed with Soviet leaders. Were they naive? Were they foolish? I don't know. It's not up to me to decide. But as a result, we found ourselves in this situation when NATO, against any promises, against any guarantees, started to expand. I remember this time I was entering the foreign ministry exactly at that moment. And I remember all the high hopes and all the illusions that we were building a new world, that it's our common gain, and now we will have equal to equal relations with Western countries, all these NATO-Russia summits and agreements. And we were actually hoping that NATO would transform into something that would either embrace Russia or it would become kind of a pillar like OSCE, where we really can have a say, and that would limit itself to certain very domestic, I would say, issues and will not take any global role. What we see now is absolutely opposite to what is happening. And of course, NATO, it's quite clear that it's part of a problem and not part of a solution. It's not a secret that before the Ukrainian summit came to its hot stage, we put on the table very concrete proposals on how we can sort out really all the contradictions, all the issues, because Ukraine joining NATO is of course much beyond our red lines, and we cannot tolerate this situation. It is, even from security point of view, it's very menacing and threatening to the very existence of my country. That's why we absolutely couldn't put up with any scenario like this. We were absolutely open. We were saying it at least from 2008, and I think maybe 2007, that there are certain red lines that NATO shouldn't cross.
Right.
We were ready to put up with the existence of this bloc, provided it is not having a global projection. Unfortunately, now we're having absolutely the opposite scenario, and we will have to deal with it. Politically, militarily, we'll see. But of course, there should be some military options, military response. It's not up to me to decide and to give you details, but there are certain men and women in Russia who get salaries specifically for calculating this military response. And Scott knows it better than anyone. So these people are really doing their job. And if, for example, Finland joins NATO and our common border is extended to more than 1,000 miles, I would say, of course, it requires certain military response from our part. And the situation when Finland and Finnish territory and Finnish objects were not targeted theoretically by some kind of response from military response from our side is part of history. This is unfortunately the choice of our neighbor. My personal take is that they were enormously profiting from being a neutral country, and most of the gains that Finland has achieved between the Second World War and now was even due to this kind of neutrality, and people were quoting Finlandization as a model for other countries, and actually a lot of specialists were citing this scenario even for Ukraine. So we were ready to speak, we were ready to discuss this, but NATO chose another way. I don't think that anyone now has any illusions about the leeway that Zelensky regime has in Ukraine. Of course, he's doing what it's being told, and this is a tragedy of this country, of course. So we have to deal with NATO. We have to fight NATO, which is waging proxy war in Ukraine. NATO is providing weapons. I think several very important personalities confirmed the very obvious fact that it's only due to the supplies of NATO weapons that Ukraine is capable to fight, because Ukraine has already squandered several armies of its own. And if NATO stops providing Ukraine with shells or with other things, I think Ukraine will not be able to fight for a week. That's quite obvious. So everybody understands that NATO is part of a problem in Ukraine, and NATO is really trying to weaken Russia with the help of Ukraine, and it's a very cozy situation for NATO. And you all remember a famous U.S. senator saying that it's the best investment for U.S. money when Russians are dying and Ukrainians are fighting. So they are absolutely happy with this situation. But this situation is going to change, and I think everybody understands the real military situation on the ground. And we all know about the results, if I can call this results, of Ukrainian counteroffensive. They were absolutely eager to make any gains on the eve of NATO summit, but they failed. And there is no secret about this. NATO is, of course, trying to kind of present it as still a good result, that everything is going to happen yet, and Ukrainians are going to fight back. Everybody understands that this is a wishful thinking. So we will have at the end, of course, to deal with NATO, to deal with it preferably diplomatically, I would say. We have our position absolutely clear, what we want. Actually, as my president recently showed to the public and disclosed to the public, there was a draft agreement with Ukrainians after 1 month only of the beginning of the hot stage of Ukrainian crisis. So it all could be stopped, and Ukraine was ready for this. There were several conditions, including Ukraine not joining NATO. Today, President Putin confirmed that there were security guarantees for Ukraine, and we are not against giving security guarantees to Ukraine. We have certain reasons why we started our special military operation. And we have to see that the goals of our special military operation are fulfilled peacefully or militarily, of course, preferably peacefully and diplomatically. So it's still, the option is still there. But Ukraine, while initially accepting in general the conditions of this draft peace treaty, then chose to reject it, and apparently it was done after the intervention from London and maybe Washington, when they really understood that it wasn't the scenario that was to the liking of US and the UK. So they wanted Ukraine to fight. They wanted Ukraine to weaken Russia as much as possible, to inflict the most possible harm to Russia, and they absolutely don't care about how many Ukrainians will die. And unfortunately, President Zelensky as well doesn't care how many Ukrainians will die. And this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy that we all feel deep in our heart. And we all are very much willing for these people to save their own lives, but they are in the hand of this bloody regime, which is absolutely loyal to NATO and which absolutely doesn't care about the core interests of Ukraine. So that's where we are. And what might be the Russian response? I think it's in the hand of our military, most and foremost, right now. Of course, we will not tolerate this situation, and NATO is becoming more and more global. By the way, today there was a meeting in Security Council, which was devoted to DPRK, which was called by certain Western countries. And it was very illustrative that the representative of China, while saying several words about this situation, he spent 2/3 of his speech lashing at NATO, saying that decisions of NATO summit citing China as a threat are absolutely not true, that China has not done anything belligerent in its history, and that NATO is now trying to project its power globally and all these things. So he was lashing at NATO, and this is also illustrative that NATO is really becoming not only European headache, but it's becoming a global headache. And I think that more and more countries are really understanding now that NATO is a really a big elephant in the room that we have to deal with. Of course, after the Ukrainian crisis is over, but this is still a question that we will have to do collectively. And it's very hard for the West to pretend that the starting position is the same that it was before the Ukrainian crisis started. No, they are different. And we all understand that NATO is weaker right now. Ukraine is weaker right now. Russia is stronger. Russia is more united. Russia is more consolidated with our president. And we are now better understanding our aims, our goals, and we are better understanding how we can achieve these goals. And I think these guys in NATO, they realize it very well, regardless of what they are saying in public. They really understand. They know the real military situation. Of course, it's far from what you would see on CNN and New York Times. So they are very careful not to drop this truth to the public, because then the public will ask very awkward questions. So where did all the money go that we spent? All these billions? What for? Why couldn't we spend this money for our own country when there are so many problems?
Can I ask you to kind
Sure.
of elaborate on the economic aspects of this war? Because we've seen just within the last week confirmation that BRICS nations are going to embrace a currency backed by gold. Can I just get you guys to elaborate on that?
I think that what we are facing right now, I wouldn't call it a Cold War or remaking of Cold War, because this is a different situation. This is not a Cold War. This is the birth, the emergence of multipolar international order, the real emergence for many years. There were a lot of lip service, a lot of speeches about this. Everybody was understanding that this is coming, but nobody knew when it really would start to get to life. And of course, this process of giving birth to such a baby is always painful to the world. I understand, but this is you can't reverse this process. It has already started. So the baby will be there. This is the new world order, and this world order is, of course, something that our US colleagues do not like, because they would have to treat other nations, other powers as equals. They would have to share responsibility, and they would have to behave in a very civilized way, which they haven't got used to, frankly. So part of this global, emerging global, new global multipolar order is, of course, new economic order, because you understand that the system, when it was the total dominance of US dollar, of International Monetary Fund, all these Bretton Woods institutions, which were absolutely unchallenged in the world, this situation is far away right now. We are moving; it's dynamic. I can't say what will be the final stage of where we will go economically, but you have already seen the very clear beginning of the process of de-dollarization. More and more countries are now understanding that the fact that they are having their wellness in dollars is their weak point. So they have to diversify. They have to rely on themselves. They have to rely on other currencies. There are a lot of possible models that could replace dollar. One of them is this idea of creating the BRICS currency, which would be guaranteed by gold. I'm not an economist. It's very hard for me to estimate how realistic it is and how quickly it can be created. But this shows that many countries of the world are really worried, and many countries of the world are not anymore trusting the US backed international system. Because what you have seen is that in the example of Russia, that Russian avoirs were frozen. To put it undiplomatically, they were stolen in many countries, and we can't use them. And all these countries that were boasting this investment climate, protection of investments, they are now saying, no, we can confiscate this. We just need to find a formula, but Russia can't use it, regardless of all the guarantees that have been given, not only to the state, but also to private investors. A lot of Russians, a lot of rich Russians, which were investing, which were kind of not very attentive to the warnings of our president, who said that you better keep your money home, but he wasn't forcing them to do it. So they lost money, much money. They are now punished for, I don't know what for being Russians. And this, the whole world sees it, and the whole world understand that this is really trampling the very basics of the Pax Americana based on the dollar. So this earthquake has already begun. This process is going on. You can't stop it. It will continue. I don't know how quickly. Economic processes usually do not happen overnight, but it's quite clear, even in the percentage that you see in the trade in dollars and in euros, you would see that this proportion is diminishing. It's visibly diminishing. And we have a big part of the trade among BRICS countries, which is now happening in our own currencies. This is already a big change. Chinese yuan, rupee, Russian ruble, whatever. So we are trying to see the alternatives. And this has never happened in reality before. There were a lot of talks about it, but it never happened in practice. Now you see when it's really starting to emerge. And this process will take some time, but I am absolutely sure that there will be some kind of change at the end of this process, and this change is looming, regardless of what the current masters of the world are thinking about this.
And that's an interesting way to put it too, because we keep hearing this phrase, rules-based international order, and many references to that during the NATO summit. And just the way you described it, it seems to me, and please comment on this, that this is a struggle between essentially a globalist vision of the future or a future, as you described it, as a multipolar reality where you have individual nation states asserting their sovereignty and coming to agreements between different countries on an individual basis. Is that an accurate portrayal of what's unfolding?
Rick, I think that everyone who is following discussions of the Security Council and the international agenda for at least, let's put it, 8 years, would see this notion of rules-based international order appearing in the speeches of our Western colleagues all of a sudden. So we noticed this change, I think, 5-6 years ago, when all of a sudden, instead of saying simply international law, they started to use this notion, rules-based international order. If you're not a specialist, you would not see big difference. So what's the point? be it international law or rules-based international order, but there is a huge difference. The difference is, and they are doing it specifically, that rules-based international order, it means that there are certain rules which are being formulated by a group of kind of normal democratic countries. They impose these rules on the others, and it has nothing to do with international law because while imposing these rules, they don't care about international law. They care about their own interests. It might coincide in certain points. It might look sexy for the others, but in a sense, this is a clear contradiction to international law. And we several times pointed out these contradictions. So when for example, in Syria, when US, France, and UK decide to make a missile strike against Syria only because they have a suspicion that Syria has used a chemical weapon, you know, this Duma thing. So for them, that's rules-based international order because they set up the rules. They say, yes, it's quite legitimate for us to do so because we know for sure that Assad is a bad guy, that he used chemical weapons. We don't need any proofs. But from the point of view of international order, this is really a big offense, big breach of international law. And that's what we want to show. Of course, it's easier for US and its allies to create kind of coalition of the willing, like, I don't know, summit of democracies, countries which would say more or less the same thing, pleasant thing to each other, citing that there are autocracies and there are democracies, all these things, which is kind of very misleading for much of the public. But in fact, what they are doing, they're just forming these clubs, which is having the rules, and they're trying to impose these rules on the others. Either you accept these rules, then you're kind of a good country, normal country. If you are not accepting these rules, then you're an autocracy, you're a bad guy. This is very simple. It's black-white mentality, and we are fighting this rules-based international order. I don't think it has any chances to kind of survive the coming years, because for many countries in the EM, it's quite clear that the only point of reference for everybody is the Charter of the United Nations. It's the international law, and we are upholding this charter. We are part of the Friends of the Charter of the UN group in the UN. There are more than 20 countries that joined this group, and we're trying to promote this idea. A lot of countries are intimidated. A lot of countries pretend that they do not see big difference, that for them it's the same. But when you speak to the diplomats, those who are really knowing the details, of course, for them, everything is clear what they are doing. And this rhetoric about rules-based international order is exactly about preserving the dominance of Western countries, about preserving this beautiful garden, as Borrell said, this preserving it from the jungle, from us, from these autocratic people. So this is ridiculous, and I think that after maybe several years, when it is over, people will give their own analysis. But so far, it's misleading for a lot of public and a lot of even specialists, and we are trying to be very vocal and very categorical in showing the difference, in showing the real face, the true colors of this rules-based international order, which is being imposed on us and on others.
You mentioned, you used the word unity. You say that Russia is more unified than ever, stronger than ever. But here in the West, I mean, the media has been trying to make the most of this strange incident that we saw with the Wagner group and this convoy that was on its way to Moscow. And I even heard speculation from, I think it was a U.S. general on mainstream media here, saying that he thinks Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, is dead. Can I just get you to comment and give us some perspective on this?
Well, first of all, from here in New York, I can't have a very thoughtful insight of what has really happened, but I can tell you that my perception is that this really goes from total misperception, misunderstanding of Western public opinion of Russia. Because to understand Russian mentality, you really need to live in Russia, to understand the way we think. For many countries of the world, certain events might seem tragic in terms of what's happening, but in terms of Russians, this is something that, well, it happens. Bad thing happens, but we will deal with it. It's like, two two neighbors fighting because of some piece of land or some, I don't know, some very, I don't know, argument over a glass of vodka. But when the enemy comes, these two neighbors would stand together shoulder by shoulder and they will fight the enemy. We have the enemy. The enemy is NATO. The enemy is Zelensky's Ukraine. And it absolutely doesn't affect all these things the way that we fight this enemy. So the capital mistake of the West, the capital mistake of those who were already gleeing this situation, saying that Russia will just fall into pieces, it was that they didn't understand that this was kind of an internal dispute. Look, our country hasn't been at war, at real war, for many years. It requires certain mobilization of the society, and of course, we're still in the process of streamlining the whole of the society for these military needs. And you might understand that it's still not a war from our perception. It's a special military operation. For those who would come to Moscow, to other cities, they would really not feel that there is fighting somewhere. People are living their absolutely normal life. There was a period of mobilization when people became a little bit nervous, but then they saw that it's kind of a limited mobilization, and there were a lot of volunteers who really went to the army. So it wasn't very painful for the society in the term that the West was portraying it. Now, still, there is a special military operation that is being conducted by specially prepared military forces, and these military forces, they actually are trying to understand how to fight and how to organize this military structure, because it takes some time and it takes some effort, and we see that they are progressing in it step by step. You see what's now happening with Ukrainian counteroffense. So we have really learned a lot of lessons from autumn and from other periods, and now we are in absolutely different situation, and we are actually kind of implementing very, very advanced military tactics and military planning and all these things. It didn't happen overnight. It required a certain changes in the society, certain changes in the command of our military. So all these things about Prigozhin, of course, they were part of this process, because Prigozhin played a very important role. He you know that he liberated Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. He and he still has very prepared people around him. But you shouldn't view these people as kind of some group that would challenge the authority of the president and his popularity, because president is really popular. And you would see that, contrary to any predictions, because people were saying that this is a mutiny against Putin, but you can't imagine it in Russia, how there can be a mutiny against Putin, because Putin is so popular, Putin is so supported, that it's absolutely unthinkable. So when people were saying to me that, look, now Prigozhin is going against Putin, I would say I would bet whatever that it will not happen. This is something that you just don't understand. Yes, there was some kind of internal fight. Yes, certain things continue still, that the army is going to find the right way how to deal with these issues. But you shouldn't view it as a challenge to the president, and you shouldn't view it as a challenge to the ability of Russia to fight against NATO in Ukraine. And this was the capital mistake of the West, because everyone who was betting on this, they were disappointed. They were saying, how come Russia should have already been taking forces from the front to fight against Prigozhin's mutiny, and then Ukraine will have this golden opportunity to fight back. It didn't happen. I had absolutely no doubts that it wouldn't happen, and I feel sorry for those who were really betting on this, because they were extremely disappointed that it didn't happen, and it will not happen. I can assure you that the society is very much mobilized, and that the president enjoys absolutely unparalleled level of support, which is even bigger in comparison with the beginning of the special military operation. So that's where we are now in this case.
So at the NATO summit, again, we see Zelensky walking around in like a green olive drab t-shirt, and army fatigues or whatever, his outfit. Everybody else is in suits. Everywhere he goes, he has this costume on. And Scott, this kind of ties into a video that I watched just yesterday talking about Agent Zelensky, where you're kind of laying out the case that he's really just an actor. And that was part one. I assume there's a part two that's going to come out. I see this as an information war as much as a kinetic war. Can I get you guys to talk about what we were witnessing at NATO and how that costume ties into everything I've just commented on?
Scott, will you say something, or is it me?
I'll give you a break.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you.
I'll give you a chance to rest your vocal cords. But you have to jump in and help me later on too. So
Okay, agreed. It's a deal.
okay. Look, we know that Zelensky, he was elected. He's a duly elected president of Ukraine. We have to respect that fact. Now, we can talk about his background. We can seek to belittle him because of his profession prior to becoming president. But he was elected president. But he ran on a platform that was about as disingenuous as it can get. At the time, I was somebody that bought into the Zelensky phenomena. I thought this was wonderful that this man who had played a president on TV. I watched the show, Servant of the People. Very good show, by the way. I didn't expect it to be, but it was. I found him to be a very compelling. The character he portrayed was a compelling person. My sympathy went for that person, and like many, if you lived in the United States at a certain time, you can recall that we had a show called West Wing, and Martin Sheen was the actor, and he, there was a period of time where people saying Martin Sheen should run for president, and my question was why? And they said because he played such a good one on TV, and that's half the problem is that this is about perception. It is.
They say that about Donald Trump once upon a time. They said that about Donald Trump. He's so good on TV. He ought to run.
So good on TV. There was a senator from Tennessee. I can't remember his name, but he's an actor as well. And people wanted him to run because he played a very strong man in the movies. And they're like, "You'll be a great president." I'm like, "Well, not really." But Zelensky ran on a platform of peace. In fact, he was elected because he convinced many ethnic Russians that he was going to actually implement the Minsk Accords. There was a TV interview he did before the election where he said something to the equivalent of, "I will get on my knees and crawl to Putin if we can get peace. I will do anything to bring peace to my country." And yet, as soon as he got elected, we now see a video that's been released of him holding a war. I choose war. I choose war. It will be war. I'm getting attacked by a cat, but sorry.
You got a cat too. We know Maverick.
I got a zoo. The cat was outside.
He wanted to say something, I think. No one should listen to him.
The cat was outside, and we have a thunderstorm going on right now, and we let the cat in because it was scared, and now it's trying to be comforted. So I feel pretty bad for kicking it off. But anyways, we have a show to do, so let's be professional. Zelensky, you have to ask yourself, is this a principled stand that he took? Meaning that I do believe that Zelensky might have been, it was a principled stand to articulate in favor of peace. But remember, Zelensky wouldn't be running for president unless he was backed by certain powers. And we know that he had very strong financial backing from an oligarch who controlled the same media outlets that propelled Zelensky to national acclaim, the comedian, the Servant of the People, etc. And it seems that Servant of the People was done by design, done to manipulate public opinion, to create the perception of Zelensky as somebody who could be president, to challenge Prigozhin, or not Prigozhin, I'm sorry, Poroshenko. Prigozhin on my mind. But so he became president. By all accounts, the initial months of his presidency was a disaster because he came face to face with the reality of governing, that it's not a television script. You don't have a teleprompter where you get to say things, and if things are going bad, screenwriters can't come in and fix everything. It's reality. And so he started to, we got to see Zelensky start to collapse as a leader. He fired the people, his experts, and he started bringing in an inner circle of people that related to his media empire. Yes men, men who would just simply say yes, because now he's being manipulated towards a war that I don't think he really wanted to fight. I mean, that's the honest to God's truth. I think if Zelensky could have jumped off this train wreck, he would have. But he was a prisoner to this. And one of the reasons that he's a prisoner, I'm not, again, I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but the corruption in Ukraine is beyond imagination. We use that term corruption, but it's beyond imagination. It's beyond your run-of-the-mill corruption. This isn't an American congressman taking $100 bills and putting it in his freezer. This isn't, a contractor taking a small kickback here and there. This is endemic corruption. Everything in Ukraine is corrupt. Nothing gets done unless the corruption machine is fed. And Zelensky got sucked into this because when you appoint somebody, you're not just appointing a minister of defense. You're appointing somebody to a position that's designed to make money for a lot of people, and not legitimate money. I'm talking about the under the table money, lots of this money. People join the government with expectations, not of serving the people, but of getting rich, of buying villas abroad. This is Ukraine. I experienced it firsthand in 1997 when I went there as a UN weapons inspector to try and get the Kuchma government to cooperate with us. And I saw what was going on. I realized that they couldn't cooperate with us because everybody's hand was in the black market selling of defense technologies, to Iraq and others. Everybody was making money, and nobody wanted to do the right thing because doing the right thing would have cut off their supply. And that's Ukraine today. So then the war comes. And now Zelensky is 100% a prisoner of the people that control him. And the people that control him at this point in time are the Western interests, MI6, the British Security Services, the CIA. To show you, give you an example of the level of control of the CIA. If you remember early on in the conflict, Zelensky made headlines with the statement, because somebody said, hey, maybe we can get you out of Kiev. Maybe you can live. He said, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. And everybody's like, whoa, what a great saying. What a stud warrior this is. This guy is the new Winston Churchill. Turns out he never said it. This was a quote from a CIA officer assigned to the embassy who gave this quote to the media and said Zelensky said it. But then later on, the CIA is like, no, he never really said that. We made that up. But that's the thing. This is all a script that's being written for Zelensky. And the new script is, you are Winston Churchill. You are the new Winston Churchill. You are the modern manifestation of Winston Churchill. And of course, Winston Churchill famously wore military costume while he was prime minister during the war. And Zelensky now is doing the same thing. He's wearing this costume. Zelensky is not a military man. He knows nothing about the military. He couldn't tell you what a weapon system was. He couldn't operate a weapon system. He couldn't go in and advise on tactics, etc. He reads from a script. That is his job, to read from a script that is written for him. Now, he's gone off script a couple times. If you remember last fall, he went to the United States where he was, where he got the tour. He got to go to the White House, and he got to go to Congress, and he had all the script. The script began, if you recall, he went to Bakhmut. And he met the soldiers in Bakhmut because he's, of course, Winston Churchill. And he went to the front. He met the soldiers. He got the flag. They signed the flag. He got the medals. He gave out medals. One was given back to him. This is all made for TV. None of this really happened. It's all scripted. None of it was genuine. And then he comes to the White House and he gives President Biden the medal. This is from the hero of Bakhmut, the medal we give to you, Mr. President. But then he went off script and started asking for things that weren't on the script. And if you recall that, the White House is like, nah, we're done, move on. He got to the Congress, Nancy Pelosi, he holds up the flag and then shouts the words Slava Ukraina, not understanding what that means, that's really the Banderas death cult call, what they shout when they burn people to death. It's not what you think it means. Zelensky knows, but he's playing the script. He has to go along with the script. And you saw him, he went off script again going into this NATO summit. You saw him at the genuine Zelensky where he got a little mad. He said, this is ridiculous. this is absurd what you're doing, what you're asking of us. And then immediately NATO went, shut up. And he shut up. He went, okay, I got to go back on script, because he's an actor. He's playing a role. He's not in charge. And this is the tragedy of the situation. This is the real human tragedy. It's easy to hate on Zelensky because he's made a lot of mistakes. But if you think about it, this is a man who got caught up in something bigger than him, and he is literally a prisoner of circumstance. And anybody that's looking to Zelensky to be part of the solution is looking in the wrong direction. He's not. He's a prisoner of circumstance. I don't know what his future is going to be. I don't know if he's going to flee Ukraine to his Miami mansion or any of other properties that he has around the world. I don't know if he's going to die at the hands of the Russian military or Ukrainians who are going to take him out. I don't know what his future is going to be, but it's not going to be as the victorious leader in charge of Ukraine. Ukraine has lost this war. It lost this war from day one. When this war started, Ukraine had an opportunity to negotiate out of this. Mr. Ambassador, don't take this wrong, but the Russians have to do a better job of public relations. The Russians, I believe, are sitting on a lot of data that would make them look a lot better. I mean, the fact that it took an African delegation to go to St. Petersburg, I guess, and meet Vladimir Putin before the Russians released the signed documents. I know Russia's in the business of respecting diplomatic protocols, and when you initial agreements, you keep that confidential. But this was important information. It helps put into perspective, what Ukraine could have done, what could have been the outcome. It makes Boris Johnson's trip to Kiev to pull out of the Istanbul, summit that could have probably manifested itself in a peace treaty. It puts it in a proper perspective. We now hear that Ukraine and Russia were actually negotiating all the way up until the start of the conflict. It would be nice to see what Ukraine failed to do, what Ukraine could have accomplished, what could have been the hundreds of thousands of lives that could have been saved, tens of millions of people that wouldn't be displaced from their homes. Everybody talks about the children. Well, what about the children now who have no stability, who have lost their fathers, who have lost their homes, who are refugees in their country or out of their country, whose lives are going to be torn asunder, whose future is now definitely uncertain and most probably going to be far more negative than it would have been had there not been a war. These are important issues that people need to talk about. And I just think that, history is on Russia's side. I think Russia's done the right thing. Russia sought to implement the Minsk Accords. This is very important. Russia, even when the Minsk Accords were ignored by the collective West, Russia put before NATO and the United States 2 draft treaties that sought not Russian dominance, but a new European security framework, which today, in retrospect, looks like a pretty good deal compared to what reality is right now. But the West turned its back. Russia negotiated with Ukraine, was betrayed. They started a special military operation, not an invasion, not an occupation, not a war, but a special military operation, the goal of which appears to have been simply to get Ukraine back to the negotiating table. And they succeeded. Everybody says Russia failed, that the first phase of the war was a failure. I don't think so. If your goal was to get Ukraine to the negotiating table, Russia got Ukraine to the negotiating table. Within a week of the initiation of the conflict, Ukraine was in Gomel beginning negotiations with their Russian counterparts that led to meetings in Turkey, that led to a scheduled meeting on 1 April in Istanbul, which apparently they had initial draft treaties ready to implement that would have given Ukraine everything they wanted. But Ukraine walked away from that. I don't know what else Russia is doing, but it appears to me that Russia, up until recently, because I agree with the ambassador that it appears that the solution will not be diplomatic for this conflict. The solution today is going to be a military solution, but that's only because that's the choice that NATO and Ukraine made. But Russia gave all the parties involved every opportunity to negotiate an outcome to this conflict that would have been more positive to Ukraine than maybe Ukraine deserved. I mean, when you listen to the speeches that Vladimir Putin has given on the subject, I believe he gave one back in February, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ambassador, where he talked about his goals, and his goals weren't the occupation of Odessa, the occupation of Kharkov, the occupation of Dnipropetrovsk. His goal was to guarantee the economic and social well-being of the new Russian territories. That's it. He wants to bring peace and prosperity to the Russian people. And then to do that, they have to drive Ukrainian forces out of these territories and then secure these territories by ensuring that the Ukrainian army isn't within striking distance. Reasonable. And had the Ukrainians agreed to this peace treaty, how many thousands of people would be alive today? But I think today we're beyond that point. I mean, I can't speak for the Russian government, never would, but this is a military problem right now. The destruction of the third NATO army, because this is the third NATO army that NATO has built with Ukraine. The first one was built between 2015 and 2022. That one was destroyed in May and June of last year. The second one is the military that enabled Ukraine to launch a successful counteroffensive in Kharkov and the right bank of Kherson. That was destroyed in the late fall, early winter of 2022 and 2023. And now we have the third army, the 60,000 strong army, 9 to 12 brigades, trained by NATO, equipped by NATO, that's being sacrificed on the battlefield as we speak. And now NATO is committed to forming up a fourth Ukrainian army. I don't think Russia is in the business of allowing this war to go on in perpetuity. I think the ambassador has said something that we're going to see some things in the near future. I think Russia is sitting on 180 to 200,000 reserves that haven't been committed to this battle, who are trained, who are prepared. And at some point in time, they will be committed to this fight. And I think that will be decisive. And I think we're going to see a military victory for Russia sooner rather than later. The real question is, does a political victory look like? What happens to Zelensky? This man who's dressed in green, this actor who's a prisoner of circumstance. What is his future?
I just have to say, for 115 billion, it seems we could have at least bought the guy a cheap suit. Go take him to Men's Warehouse.
Well, 511
to go to a NATO summit, for crying.
511's making a lot of money. I mean, that's the brand that he's wearing. 511, their tactical stuff. So I think there's a lot of people out right now.
Corporate sponsorship, huh?
I think it is corporate sponsorship.
Sounds
Yeah.
about right. So I want to talk a little bit about the declaration that was adopted at the NATO summit, all 31 members, because what's interesting about the document, this 24-page document, is that very little of it, only a fraction, deals with the war in Ukraine. In the rest of the document, and this is the scary part that most people will never read, in the rest of the document, NATO pretty much declares its intention to impose its will upon the entire world, leaving out hardly any region or contingent in what NATO is calling a 360-degree approach. Now, that scares the crap out of me. Now, as far as Russia goes, it's only in the first few pages of the document that talks about Russia, but boy, this language is very harsh. And that's why I want to address it with the ambassador while he's here. The Putin government is denounced in language that rules out from the outset any solution to the Ukraine war at the negotiating table. No diplomacy. There can be, quote, no impunity for its, quote, war crimes. And all those responsible, they say, must be held accountable, NATO demands. And a precondition for peace is, quote, Russia's complete and unconditional withdrawal. I know this is nothing new. They've been saying this all along. But this language directed at Putin says, in light of its hostile policies and actions, we cannot consider Russia to be our partner. Would you care to respond, Ambassador?
That's a terrible threat.
It is.
But they don't consider Russia to be their partner. Haven't they asked us, do we want to be their partner? Well, this is kind of a wishful thinking, of course, of this kind of declaration. I must confess I haven't read these things because I'm not interested in the details of what they have adopted. But let's face the truth. that no matter how brave and how resolute the NATO might try to seem, but NATO is weakened, NATO is shattered, because NATO, the whole NATO is fighting Russia in Ukraine. The whole NATO is supplying weapons. Yes, this is not the most sophisticated weapons that NATO has. That's true. The silver lining for NATO is that it is getting rid of the old Soviet weaponry and trying to modernize its own arsenal. But we have seen that there are weak points in NATO as well, and that there is a terrible shortage of ammunition. There is terrible shortage of military equipment. All these NATO was afraid. A lot of NATO members were really afraid to send sophisticated weapons to Ukraine because they really didn't want it to face Russian weaponry. They didn't want to have the picture when NATO equipment is burning under the strikes of Russian artillery, and that's what we are seeing. Again, there are a lot of trophies that we have taken. There are a lot of equipment that we are now studying, that we also have penetrated into a lot of NATO secrets right now because of this. NATO is absolutely aware of this. There are very few things that NATO really can provide Ukraine with right now, no matter what they say. They are almost exhausted of things that they can provide. Now they say cluster munitions. This is, of course, this is a crime against humanity, all this decision on cluster munitions. But will it be a game changer? I really don't think so. It will not be a game changer. It will be a tragedy, a more tragedy for Ukraine. It will be more tragedy for the fertile lands of Ukraine, which will be mined, and it will take decades and decades to demine. So this is a tragedy for Ukraine, but it's not a game changer for military campaign. So NATO is really afraid, and I think that the text of this resolution, no matter how harsh the words are, it betrays certain degree of nervousness of NATO. Because what else can NATO do with Russia? What else? Enter the direct war? This is a scenario, but we all understand what will be the consequences.
Oh
so
boy.
Yeah.
Actually, there's more in this document that will shock you. If you haven't had a chance to read it, because you ask, would we get directly involved? And the war plan, which is 4,000 pages, guys, 4,000 pages. It was just adopted at the conference this week. This details the troop and the weapons deployments throughout Eastern Europe. NATO's rapid reaction force will be increased from 40,000 to 300,000 soldiers. And the communique refers to the plans, quote, to ensure timely reinforcement of all allies. In line with our 360-degree approach, we have committed to fully resource and regularly exercise these plans to be prepared for high intensity and multi-domain collective defense. I'd like to get Scott's thoughts on that.
Look, if you give me enough time, I can write a 4,000-page defense doctrine. I can say anything I want to say. I mean, I could give me a number. How many troops do you want? 300,000? Why not make it 400,000? Because it doesn't matter. Here's the fact. NATO has committed to man four what they call battle groups, one in each of the Baltic republics and then one in Poland. These are reinforced battalion-sized units. Germany is responsible for one. I think Canada is responsible for one. The United Kingdom is responsible for one. The United States is responsible for one. And other NATO members come in and supplement it. Now NATO says they're going to beef these up to brigades. But the problem is the NATO militaries can't do it right now. For instance, the British, they had to cannibalize much of their military to put together this battalion. Because remember, when you put a battalion in place, it's rotational. So you're not just having the battalion that's there. There's a battalion that's training up and another battalion. So you need 3 battalions that are part of this rotation. And now they want to turn it into a brigade. And the brigade is going to be at a minimum doubling the size, probably tripling the size. So you've gone from 3 battalions to 9 battalions. And now the British say, we can't do it. We don't have the forces capable of generating that. And that's just a brigade. Just a brigade. The Germans are saying the same thing. We can't do it. We can't get a brigade out of the barracks because we've atrophied over the years. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen, the current president of the European Commission, she used to be the German defense minister. She destroyed the German military because nobody in NATO took their military job seriously until recently, and they're paying the price today. General Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander, said back in January that NATO hasn't imagined the scope and scale of the fighting that's taking place in Ukraine. So if you haven't imagined it, you can't prepare for it. NATO doesn't have the stockpiles. Artillery is a big problem. Russia is a military that makes extensive use of artillery, and they've prepared for it. And even Russia had to adapt. Russia realized, man, we're burning up artillery at a higher rate than we even imagined. So Russia's defense industries had to adapt to come on, and it's come online. They're producing the ammunition. We haven't even begun to do it. That's why we're providing cluster munitions, not because they're a magic weapon that's going to change the war. It's because we don't have anything else to give the Ukrainians. So we're violating every principled stance we've taken on cluster munitions, and we're giving them to Ukrainians and rewriting the rules. Again, to reinforce the ambassador's position, the rules-based international order isn't about the rule of law. It's about what's convenient to the United States.
That's right, because they're constantly contradicting themselves, Scott. I mean, they said that cluster munitions were a war crime when Russia was supposedly using them, and now it's fine when we do it?
It's okay for us to do it because we have moral authority, apparently, but we don't. But the fact is, where are they going to get these 300,000 troops? These troops exist on paper. First of all, let's talk about the 40,000 rapid deployment force that they have today. It doesn't exist. I mean, yes, nations have earmarked troops that when you look at them in their totality, come up to 40,000. I challenge NATO right now to get those 40,000 troops together in one place. They can't. So it's a fictional force. It doesn't exist. That's just a reality. Now they want to make it 300,000. Where are they going to get the forces? And the important thing, one of the things you mentioned is they're going to regularly exercise this capability. Mm-hmm. Lori, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was part of what we call the Rapid Deployment Force. We were a brigade-sized element that were prepared to deploy on a moment's notice anywhere in the world to fight any threat. We were a combined arms unit, and we carried out combined arms warfare training. We were in the field all the time. I was in that unit for 2.5 years, and I spent my entire time in the field training, nonstop training, live fire training, not fake training. We're pumping rounds down range. We're moving. We're practicing realistic training because that's what you have to do to be proficient in combined arms warfare. NATO hasn't trained like this since the end of the Cold War. We used to do reforger exercises where we'd fly hundreds of thousands of troops into Europe and train them up. NATO hasn't trained like this. NATO hasn't done a multi-brigade training evolution in 30 years. NATO doesn't know how to do any of the things that you're talking about. The training they give the Ukrainians to attack the Russian defensive lines in Zaporizhia, training was done at Grafenvor base. NATO doesn't know how to do that which they are training because they're not prepared to do. They've spent 20 years fighting low-intensity conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've restructured their entire military to focus on that kind of war. They can't imagine the war they're doing. So now, all of a sudden, NATO is an expert in this. They've put together a 4,000 plan war plan. This is a political document. It is garbage. They can't afford to do what they're doing. They don't understand the costs that are accrued. They can't produce enough ammunition to send to Ukraine. You think they're going to be able to produce enough ammunition to support the kind of training that they're talking about? Training is expensive. It's extraordinarily expensive. And if you're going to train on a regular basis a 300,000 strong rapid deployment force, you're going to go bankrupt very, very quick.
Right.
This is
if I may step in at this moment, of course, I can't match Scott's military expertise. I'm a diplomat. And I know that my colleagues in Moscow, of course, will give a necessary response from military point of view to all these threats by NATO. But let's clearly distinguish between what you said. This is some kind of a plan, wishful thinking of NATO for the post-war period, I would say. But what is the military plan for the war in Ukraine for NATO? What can you read from these documents? And it's very simple. it is said that we will help you with intelligence, with training, with ammunition that we have, cluster munitions, whatever. But we will not use our soldiers in Ukraine. Zelensky wanted very much repeatedly that there would be soldiers in Ukraine from NATO countries, because he would say that we are fighting for NATO, NATO should fight for itself. They are trying to disregard all these things. They're saying, no, there will not be NATO soldiers in Ukraine. I think President Biden, after the summit, made it absolutely clear that there will not be American soldiers in Ukraine, because this would mean direct war with Russia, and the United States wants to avoid it at any price. So all the things that you cite, first of all, it's wishful thinking. I agree with Scott. Secondly, it's something that is the period after the war. What is now? What is the plan? The plan is to fight until the last Ukrainian. I think that this moment is very, very near, because what we see in the front, what we get from there, the different sources of information, it's about absolutely tremendous, unthinkable, unfathomable losses that Ukraine is having there. That they are really throwing the conscripts, they are throwing the men who are absolutely unprepared as cannon fodder, and they absolutely giving no damn about it, about what's happening. This is a tragedy. So how long can it happen like this? I don't know. Of course, there is internal situation in Ukraine is very, very heated because of this, because people understand that they are not even going to fight. Many of them are patriotic, but they understand that this is not an army. This is not a battle. This is just a meat grinder that they are being brought to, and they are not fighting. Their commanders are not fighting according to the rules of war. It's becoming more and more clear. How long can it continue? I don't know. We have patience, we are waiting. They are making counteroffensive. We are on defensive sides. Scott knows that it's easy. It's always easier to do it when you are in defense and when you have the positions prepared for defense. So it's continuing. They are just throwing thousands and thousands of soldiers. So the losses are immense. What is the NATO plan for this? What will they do? Who will fight there? At some point of time, they will find the situation when nobody will fight. Because first of all, there will be no more soldiers. Secondly, the society is really becoming sick and tired of what is happening. Because Scott started with describing what Ukraine is. I also can make some contribution to this. I visited Ukraine several times in previous years. I always had the impression that Ukraine has stuck in the 90s. It very much resembled to me Russia in the 90s.
Kind of is. I've
Yeah,
noticed
before
that. Yes.
before Putin, I would say 1993, 94, with all these oligarchs, with all this lawlessness. Absolutely.
Looks like the Yeltsin era in Ukraine, doesn't it?
Stuck in the 90s until now. They didn't have Putin. That was their problem, because nobody could really make something good for this country, and they got very much manipulated by Western advisors, by US advisors. This is the thing that we rejected at some point of time, maybe 97, 98, and of course with Putin's arrival in 99, we rejected this kind of tutorship, and we said that it's not serving our national interests. Then they started to kind of try to weaken us with the war in Chechnya. We now understand very clearly who was behind it and who was really trying to use Chechnya to weaken Russia. Okay, we coped with it, we managed, but Ukraine didn't. They had these US and other Western advisors who were using Ukraine already at this time for their national interests. They also brought the Americans. They brought a lot of Ukrainian nationalists, their grandsons and granddaughters, who brought this ideology step by step. It was poisoning the society. They didn't fight with this, and now you see that Bandera is a national hero of Ukraine. And Scott is absolutely right. I still have a lot of Ukrainian friends. A lot of people are writing to me, and they say that they feel very much betrayed by Zelensky, because Zelensky won 3/3 of the vote, 3/4 of the vote, because he was promising to uphold Russian language. He was promising to fight against discrimination, against segregation. He said a lot of very, very right things. His electoral program was very much to the liking, not only in Ukraine but in Russia. We all had high hopes that now we will have peace, and he did exactly the opposite. He betrayed everybody. He betrayed the Russian. You know that he is native Russian speaker. He betrayed his grandfather, who was fighting in the Great Patriotic War. He betrayed Jewish people even. I don't want to elaborate on this because this is sensitive, but really, How can you worship those people who have their bloods in hands? So he betrayed everyone, and he's an actor. He's given a script. He's reading this script. If he will be given another script, I'm absolutely sure that he will read aloud this script. I also want to comment a little bit about this moment when we started negotiations with Ukraine. And Scott is absolutely right that after 6 weeks of fighting, the peace was there. It was not about territory. It was specifically not about territory before the beginning of special military operation. You remember how patient we were. And if Ukraine implemented the Minsk agreement, it was not about Donetsk and Lugansk becoming part of Russia or becoming independent. They had to enjoy a high degree of autonomy within Ukraine, but Ukraine had to be transformed. Ukraine had to be transformed in a normal country, respecting the rights of its citizens, respecting their rights to speak their own language, to worship their own heroes. It's very simple for every European society, and there is nothing extraordinary in this. So we were patient, we were waiting for this. But then, when it happened for 8 years already, people were dying in Donetsk and Lugansk. Then our patience, of course, expired at some point of time, and the patience of these people expired. So we acknowledged their independence, and it meant that already at this stage, if we spoke about territory, so we, of course, there was absolutely no discussion about no questioning of keeping Crimea and of keeping the republics of Donbass as independent entities at this moment, because there was no referendum at this moment of their entry to the Russian Federation. And you shouldn't forget about the fact that our troops were several kilometers from Kiev, I would say, from all the decision-making quarters. They could easily enter there. If we wanted a military solution to this crisis, we would have done it. But we didn't want victims. We didn't want bloodshed at this moment. And as a gesture of goodwill, we withdrew our forces from very many territories at this point, including from around Kiev, including from around Sumy and Chernigov and all these things. We withdrew them voluntarily. Now, of course, the Ukrainians would tell you we fought them back and we chose them from Kiev. It's bullshit, frankly. Sorry for saying this word. They didn't chase us. It was our voluntary decision. And what did we get after that? We got Bucha. We got this Bucha hoax. So instead of capitalizing on this, they tried to expose us in the very, very British sense, in the very Skripal or MH17 sense. They tried to expose us with this fake situation, fake news, and to show to the world how cruel Russians are and how criminal they are. So it all started in absolutely wrong direction. Even about Kherson, again, we withdrew from Kherson. It was not that we were chosen from Kherson. You remember that General Surovikin said that it was no point for keeping this territory because it was very difficult to defend it. It was our choice. Now they are saying we chose Russian from Kherson. This is not true. This was a military solution, military decision of our leadership. So again, the peace deal was within reach at this moment in March, and there were military guarantees, there were security guarantees for Ukraine from many countries, not only from Western countries, but also from Russia, from China, from Belarus, from the others. What we wanted from our special military operation, what is still, we want Ukraine to be a normal country, a normal neighbor, which is not threatening us, which is not discriminating its Russian-speaking population. So it was all in this treaty. It was all within reach. It could have been done, but then the Brits, because of their ambitions, they said, no, guys, you're a very tough guy. You're a good president. You're the best president. You're like Winston Churchill. You have to fight, and we will help you to fight, and then you will defeat Russia. It will be enormous breakthrough for the whole of humanity, and you will be a world hero, maybe world president. I don't know, whatever they promised to him, and they convinced him that he had to fight and he has the chance to win. And this is a fatal mistake. Now we understand that if there will be a diplomatic solution, I don't know, frankly, but if there will be a diplomatic solution, the conditions will absolutely different for Ukraine from what it was March last year, starting from territory and coming to other conditions. And I don't know, frankly, I don't have any idea of how it can look like, because so far there is nothing on the ground but only military solution, military decision of this conflict, and we are ready for this. Again, our president said that we are ready to implement the goals of our special military operation in diplomatic way. We are ready to do it in military way. If they leave us no choice, then we will continue like this.
And sadly, Ambassador, I, like you, I don't see, especially after I read this document that was just adopted by NATO again this week, I don't see any hopes for a diplomatic solution in the near future, at least with this current administration, the Biden administration running the country. And speaking of friendly neighbors turning unfriendly, I have to ask about how things are changing now with Finland and Sweden, because this week Sweden's, those last obstacles to Sweden's accession were removed. So they're going to be part of NATO. And as a result, the land border of NATO member states with Russia has now more than doubled in size. It's moved to within 150 kilometers of St. Petersburg. The Baltic Sea has become a NATO sea to which Russia has access only via a small corner in St. Petersburg and the besieged enclave of Kaliningrad. And I wanted to ask either of you could take this question. Maybe Scott would like to take this one since it's more of a military question. How does Russia respond to this at this point? They're in
Russia's already responded. Vladimir Putin has ordered the expansion of the Russian military from 900,000 to 1.5 million. They're recruiting these new contract soldiers as we speak. One of the things that are being formed is a new military district in the Leningrad vicinity. When I look at it, it's 5 divisions, 70,000 troops that are being trained, organized there. This is the reality. The Baltic is only a NATO lake as long as Russia is willing to allow it to be a NATO lake. At the moment the Baltic states try to squeeze out Kaliningrad is the moment, again, I can't speak on behalf of Russia, but Russia has indicated that that won't be allowed to happen. Most NATO war games show that the Russian military, by going to war, not a special military operation, but going to war, would resolve the Baltic problem very shortly, in short order, weeks. And then you no longer have a NATO lake, you have a Russia. If Finland thinks that now joining NATO has made it stronger, understand this, that the 70,000 troops together with existing formations in the Kola Peninsula and elsewhere, they're not going to be passive in a general war with NATO, that Finland will pay a heavy price. And that heavy price could be the loss of, its territory along the Baltics to secure St. Petersburg, et cetera. Again, I can't speak on behalf of Russia. I'm just saying as a military person, it's sound military logic. You can look at a map and you can understand what the problem is, and you can understand what the solution is. And as a former military professional, I would say that the solution is obvious, and that is that Russia will do that which is necessary to protect Russian national security interests, and that the Baltics and Finland would pay an extraordinarily heavy price in a conflict that they cannot win. Neither the Baltics nor Finland can match Russia for military. NATO is this giant alliance, and there's a lot of impressive numbers attached to that alliance. But a lot of those numbers reside in the continental United States. A lot of those numbers reside in Turkey. A lot of those numbers reside in Spain and Italy, far removed from the potential points of initial conflict, namely the Baltics and Finland. The Finnish military and the Baltic military cannot, even with these battle groups deployed, cannot stand up to the Russian military. And the Finns would have to expend an awful lot of money in order to get their military up to NATO standards, ready to fight. I just think that this is not the problem that you painted it out to be, Lori. There's no one in NATO right now that's confident. There's literally all you have are Twitter trolls, the NAFO crowd, running around showing the maps with the arrows, and this is a NATO lake and all this stuff. There's not a military professional out there that's saying, yeah, that's accurate. Every military professional that I know is looking at that map saying, This is a nightmare. This is a problem. It's an expensive problem. They're looking at it and they're seeing dollar signs or euro signs because a lot of money is going to have to be poured into this situation when, as the ambassador said, there was no need. Finland was doing great. There was no threat from Russia. There was no reason to go this route. Look at Sweden. It has a pathetically small military for a reason, because they're neutral, and therefore they don't need to have a large standing army, etc. But now that's changed. They now have joined an alliance that seeks the strategic defeat of Russia. And here's the greatest irony of it all. And it came out, I don't know if anybody watched the press conference that was given at the end of the Nordic summit, where Joe Biden was asked a question by a Finnish reporter. But the question was brilliant. It was, hey, in 2 years, there's an election taking place in the United States. Finland just literally joined an alliance, making a long-term gamble on NATO. But in 2 years, if we get a different American president, America may not be as aggressive on NATO as Joe Biden currently is. Where does that leave Finland? And the answer is out of luck, because you've bought into an alliance that is fundamentally broken. This notion of NATO unity doesn't exist. Just take a look at the ridiculous behind-the-scenes negotiations that had to take place to get Turkey to accede to the notion of sending Swedish the ratification packet to the parliament. It's not a done deal, by the way. Turkey just said we're going to send it there. They haven't done it. But that's not unity. You don't horse trade when you're a unified thing. You don't have to bribe somebody to do something if there's genuine unity. Look at Hungary. They're not on board. Look at Germany. They're not on board with a lot of things. France vetoed NATO opening up a liaison office in Japan. The last thing that NATO is a unified military alliance. There are a lot of political fractures there. There are a lot of military problems. And these problems will manifest themselves immensely as NATO seeks to begin the process of becoming that which the planning document says they want to be. You could make a comedy show out of watching what's going to happen internally, domestically, in the various 31, soon to be 32 members of NATO as they struggle with how do we make Stoltenberg's plan of 300,000 rapid deployment force reality, because there's money attached to everything there. Money that doesn't exist, by the way. Germany is a nation that's in economic decline, deindustrializing as we speak. The British, their economy is in free fall. The rest of Europe is struggling. France has shut down, industries because of the high cost of energy. What happens this winter? There's a lot of concern in Europe about what this winter is going to bring. Are they going to get fortunate enough to have a very mild winter like they did last winter? Or if it's a severe winter, will there be energy to keep the economy going, to keep the people secure in their homes? We don't know. And what are the political consequences of that? One by one, European governments that were in favor of this conflict are starting to talk. And, money is a political decision. This military document doesn't happen unless politicians are able to allocate the resources necessary to make it happen. And these politicians are going to be struggling against domestic constituencies that aren't thrilled about freezing it, about losing their jobs, about losing, their future is uncertain. I don't think this 300,000 man army is ever going to happen, because I don't think NATO is going to be able to make it happen. I'm not saying that NATO is gone. It's been around for a long time, and it's got legs, but not yet. But I think NATO, what we've seen, this conflict, I think is it's the peak. It's the high water moment for NATO, and everything after this conflict is going to be looking at NATO. Europe is already waking up to the fact when NATO loses this conflict, and they will lose this conflict, they have to understand why this conflict happened and how Europe was taken hostage by American national security interests. And the sooner Europe realizes that they have to divorce themselves from the United States and come up with a European security framework independent of American dominance, then NATO is done, because NATO is a tool of American foreign policy. It's national security policy. Has nothing to do with legitimate European security interests. And France has already woken up to this fact. Germany is waking up to this fact. Italy is waking up to this fact. Those are the big three. And I just think that NATO is on the long, slow path towards the exit.
If I may,
You know,
just a couple
I know
of
we're almost out of time
couple of
here.
words.
Ambassador, did you want to add to that?
I just want to say, as Finland's neighbor, my perspective of whether Finland has won, has got something, or lost something. I think that it was a fatal choice of Finland, very big mistake, because Finland was a prosperous state. It's 5 million people, very small. It profited from trade with Russia. It profited from Russian energy resources, and there were a lot of Russians visiting Finland. A lot of them had property. You know that almost all the population of St. Petersburg, they rented something there, they bought something there, and there was a train, several trains per day that went between St. Petersburg and Helsinki. Now it's all gone, of course. All the money has gone, and instead of being a prosperous, very I would say fine nation, now Finland is a front state because it has become a state within NATO with a front with Russia, because this is a border between Russia and NATO right now. It has to be secured. Some equipment will be brought there, specialists will be brought there, troops will be brought there, and there will be military expenditures. So in my understanding that Finland has lost a lot by becoming a member of NATO. It was a unique situation which was profitable for everybody, first and foremost for Finland. And of course the Finns will feel it. I'm not speaking about military response. I think Scott covered this issue brilliantly. I'm speaking about this human to human, people to people situation. So Finland will be losing every month from the fact that it has voluntarily disconnected from Russia. So it will lose more and more and more, and they will understand at some point of time that this was a mistake. But I'm afraid that it will be too late to realize this. The country will change. That's what I wanted to add.
And you know, time has just flown. I have so many more questions, and I will say, if you guys thought that the language in the declaration that was adopted by NATO this week was harsh towards Russia, wait until you see what it says about China. Now, we don't have time to get into that tonight, but I would encourage everybody to go take a look, because that is definitely going to be our next war unless we stop this. And NATO made that very, very clear in their declaration that was adopted by all 31 NATO countries this week. So I just had one last question for you guys, and either one of you can take it because I know you're both well versed. Maybe you'd both like to comment on this. A lot of Westerners, certainly Americans, do not understand the history of NATO. And I want to dig into that just a little bit before we wrap up. They don't understand that NATO had a lot of Nazis in it after World War II. Yeah. From its very origins, it was in many ways a Nazi organization. I argue that it still is to this day. Would either of you like to comment on the Nazi history of NATO?
Well, I know that there were a lot of former German military who found good jobs in NATO, and you know that a lot of Nazis were evacuated to the United States. And in this regard, I think there is something in common between NATO and Ukraine, because Ukraine was also a victim of all these people, their relatives and descendants that came and poisoned the atmosphere there. So, of course, the initial sin of NATO was the same. There was a lot of Nazi influence. There were a lot of former criminals which actually were never punished, but they were utilized because of their experience and because of what Americans thought about them. That was the building blocks of NATO at this moment. It's very difficult for me to qualify NATO Nazi now or not Nazi. I don't think it's now something that is actual, but it was still built on a hatred towards Russia. That's for sure. It was built on Russophobia, and it remains very Russophobic organization, which is absolutely incapable of thinking any positive agenda apart from inflicting defeat to Russia and weakening Russia, and now also China. And you're absolutely right. And I referred to Chinese ambassador today in Security Council meeting, lashing out on NATO unexpectedly because of these things.
I think he read the declaration. My goodness.
Yeah, and that his people in the capital. So NATO is going from one headache to another, and I don't think that they really realize that maybe they are trying to bite some piece that they are not capable of doing so, even opening the mouth, not only about China, but even about Russia. And they do not realize it. They just keep going as it was before. But the times have changed, the epoch has changed, and it's absolutely another. It's another security situation and another geopolitical situation. And NATO strategists, they don't realize it. They just try to pretend that nothing has happened, and they keep going. And NATO is on the bright side of the planet. It is not the case, and we will very soon feel, and they will feel, that they have miscalculated, very severely miscalculated in their strategic plan.
Scott, any comments on the Nazi history of NATO?
Well, look, Nazi Germany was defeated by a coalition of nations that include the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. In fact, those are the four powers that occupied Germany at the end of the war. A lot of people don't realize that a peace treaty that brought an end to the war wasn't signed until 1990. There's a reason, because a peace treaty would have complicated the existence of NATO. The first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Hastings, Brit, famously said that the purpose of NATO was to keep the Russians out, keep the Germans down, keep the Americans in. Yep. Keep the Germans down is an interesting concept. You see, there was a Morgenthau plan at the end of the Second World War that sought to make sure that Germany could never again militarize. You couldn't get the combination of industry and militarization and nationalism together, rear its ugly head. The idea was to deindustrialize Germany. Now, that was rejected because to rebuild Europe at the end of the Second World War, the decision was made that they needed the German industrial base to do that. But what that means is that the very industries that worked hand in glove with the Nazi government to create this military industrial complex as Germany not only remained, but were sustained militarily. They became part of the NATO military machine. There was no denazification. The same men who ran the companies under Adolf Hitler ran the companies under NATO. Rheinmetall, today it's up there making the news because of the Leopard tank and everything. Well, Rheinmetall made tanks for the Nazis. There's been no break in ownership. Krupp and the other industries are there. The German, military masters, and look, the German officer corps was very well trained, and they knew how to fight the Russians. Not successfully, apparently, but they knew how to fight the Russians. So when NATO wanted to focus on that, and they brought Germany into the alliance, you saw immediately elevated into senior positions. These former Nazi officers are now working for NATO. The German military is back. Unthinkable that within less than 10 years after the defeat of Nazi Germany, the German military is backed by the same industrial base that hasn't been deindustrialized, with the same officers in charge. Crazy. But what's even worse from the perspective of Ukraine, and I'll keep this part quick, General Galen was an intelligence officer who ran the intelligence, I think it was the 12th part, I could be wrong on that, but he ran it. It basically ran the Eastern Front. And one of the things that Galen did is make common cause with partisan units that became stay-behind units. The most famous of these, or infamous, or well-known perhaps, were the Banderists, the organization of Ukrainian nationalists. They stayed behind, and Galen ran them. He used them to disrupt operations in the back. He used them to collect intelligence, and he had this vast network. Galen's a war criminal. He's a man who is responsible for deaths of civilians. He should have been arrested, tried, put up against the wall, shot, or hung by the neck until dead.
Instead, who was funding and protecting it, Scott?
Well, first the OSS, which was the Office of Special Services World War II Intelligence Group, that then in 1947 transitioned into the CIA. So Galen became a CIA asset. German intelligence was comprised primarily of former Nazis who the unit never disbanded. People need to understand that. It's not like they were disbanded, brought together. The unit was taken intact with their records and plugged straight in. So Nazis remained Nazis. They just took off their little running partisans against the Soviets. And from 1945 until 1953, there was a horrific war being fought on the soil of Poland, Ukraine. The numbers, I'm going to throw some numbers out there. I could be wrong. My understanding is that 48,000 Red Army and Soviet security forces were killed during this time. That's 10,000 less than the total cost that the United States, paid in the Vietnam War. I'm trying to put that to show you the intensity of this fighting. It's not like this was minor skirmishing. This is a major war being run by NATO on Soviet soil. They killed hundreds of thousands of civilians in this fighting. Hundreds of thousands of Banderas or Ukrainian nationalists also died. This is horrific fighting, bloody fighting. They were defeated, but then they, half of them went to the Gulag. I'm not against that. The other half fled to the West, where they set up diasporas of Ukrainian nationalists who were really Banderas supporting the Nazis, and they continued to be funded and organized by the Nazis or Nazi supporters, the CIA. 60 miles from my home in Ellenville, New York, there's a park, the Park of Heroes, where they have the statues of 5 Ukrainian nationalists, including Bandera. And every summer they hold parades with torches, wearing Nazi uniforms, holding up Bandera's portrait, singing these songs. That's in America, in the United States. That's happening as we speak. The CIA and Nazi-affiliated Germans are at the heart of what's going on in Ukraine today. And that's an aspect of the story that people aren't picking up on. Anyways, I went
That's
off.
why I asked.
Okay.
Bullseye, right on the money as usual. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Rick, any further questions before we wrap
No,
up?
I just want to thank both of you for joining us on the program tonight. It's a privilege, an honor to have you here. You've covered so much ground and given us perspective and information that I have not seen or heard anyplace else. So I'm so grateful to both of you, because we need this information now more than ever.
We do. And I wanted to get the two of you here because Dimitry brings us the diplomatic point of view. Scott can bring us that military expertise. And, there is a diplomatic aspect to this, and there's a military aspect to this. And it looks like, after what we saw at the NATO summit this week, unfortunately, the military solution is going to be the one employed for the time being. It just doesn't seem that there's any hope for a diplomatic solution anytime soon. But don't give up. Keep fighting, Dimitry, or rather, keep fighting for peace.
Never. I will never give up.
Fighting for peace. And one last thing I wanted to say, since I've got you both here and I've wanted to facilitate a meeting between Dimitry and Scott for quite some time. Scott just came back from a long trip to Russia. And the primary objective, as I understand it, Scott's trying to get us a new arms control treaty.
That's ambitious, but I'm trying to promote arms control. I'm trying to promote nuclear disarmament. I'm trying to promote peace. Yeah.
And what better place to do that than through the United Nations? So,
No, it's yeah.
Unfortunately, our Western colleagues in the United Nations are very much afraid of Scott. We tried to bring him several times as a briefer, and always our Western countries blocked it. They have such an opportunity, unfortunately. So I still have hope to have him as our briefer at some maybe ARIA meeting event, as informal meeting of Security Council. We can think about it. But why not? What you are doing is a very commendable and a noble thing, and of course we need arms control. But it's hard to imagine right now in all this mess where we should start. So we need to a more clear picture. Now it's the water is too muddy to get into this. But still, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying.
Absolutely.
Well, to me, the most important aspect of this, I mean, I agree with the ambassador. The diplomatic situation right now, the political situation is untenable. But we can't even. Let's say it wasn't. We still have a big problem in the United States. It's called Russophobia. The horrific amount of anti-Russian sentiment that has infected mainstream America. This has to be addressed. We need the American people to overcome Russophobia so that arms control becomes an attractive solution right now. People have turned their back on arms control because they have an irrational fear of Russia. And I think the more that can be done to dissuade them to stop them of viewing Russia as a threat and instead viewing Russia as a partner for global peace. It doesn't mean that. Look, a lot of things have happened, and while I believe individual Americans and individual Russians can be friendly and should be friendly, there's no reason why they shouldn't. I think our governments it's going to take a while to repair the damage that's been done by successive administrations and their anti-Russian posturing. But the best thing that we could do is to start working together cooperatively towards mutually beneficial, peaceful outcomes. And I think that pressure can be put on the American government, my government, by my people, if they stop fearing Russia and start viewing Russia through realistic lenses. And so that's something that can be done right now, and that's what I'm working on.
Well, God bless you. Keep that up, and I hope that we're going to do that big peace march next June, right?
It's June, yeah. That's still a goal to get a million Americans in Central Park to promote. So, and people say, well, that'll never happen, but it did happen in June of 1982, right. And that million-person march in Central Park created it opened the domestic political window that empowered Ronald Reagan to begin looking at disarmament properly, and it led to the INF Treaty, the signing of the INF Treaty. So let's hope that history can repeat itself.
Yes, I believe that it can happen, and maybe we should march to the United Nations too when we do that.
I'm not against it.
What do you think of that, Dimitry?
Why not?
Sure, why not?
Absolutely, of course. I know that a lot of fellow Americans are really very friendly towards my country, and we don't feel animosity towards rank and file Americans. I just want to add, and Scott knows it better than me, that really, unfortunately, this architecture, arms control architecture, which was in place from the 90s, it was step by step dismantled by the US, step by step. And there is a very clear chronicle of this, and this was unfortunate. We were warning on this. We were trying to kind of find common sense, to appeal to common sense, but absolutely without any result. So there should be really, of course, it takes two to tango. Maybe now in this situation, maybe three to tango or four to tango. I don't know, but there is no hope to this, because the mentality, the approach towards this should change, and first and foremost in the United States, because the United States was the biggest problem, and you absolutely correctly described what was behind this. So it's very hard to imagine arms control without fundamental change in the perception of this country, of Russia and of the world, not only of Russia, that the necessity to do something for the benefit of the world and not only for the benefit of the United States. And this is a very, very perilous, I would say, period, but you have to take it. You have to kind of find a solution, find an approach that would be friendly towards the rest of the world, including Russia, including China. And this is what multipolar world is about, by the way. That's the core prospect. It's a win-win situation for many countries, not only for one country which controls and exploits the others.
Well, Dimitry, I don't envy your position at the United Nations, because I have watched very carefully over the last couple of years now, as all of Russia has tried to continue negotiations, continue diplomacy, keep the door open. And it just keeps getting slammed on your nose time and time again. And we just saw that again this week at the NATO summit. The language that I read from that declaration was so hostile, and it just made it clear that we cannot consider Russia a trading partner. We will not deal with Russia in any way, shape, or form. And we're shooting our own feet here, it seems to me.
You need to read between the lines, Laurie, and I told you what's my interpretation of this declaration. Really, you pay too much attention to this. It's much more than it deserves.
I shouldn't put any faith whatsoever in those words, but those are troubling words, and they're undiplomatic words, and that's what concerns me. I would like to hear a much more congenial tone between our diplomats. And your diplomats are always friendly and congenial. Lavrov's a rock star. I love him. So, you guys have wonderful diplomats, and we've got Antony Blinken.
No comment.
So there we are.
He's a diplomat. This is why he's a diplomat.
Well, you guys have been very diplomatic tonight, and also, very, I think, honest and blunt at times, just straight up. And I appreciate that. I'm grateful again for you guys joining us here tonight. And I hope that in our small way, tonight's conversation helps push us a little bit closer toward peace.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Scott. It was really a great opportunity.
It was an honor, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Rick. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you
Thank
to
you,
all
gentlemen.
of you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
We'll see you soon. Peace. Peace is what we want.
Yes.
And thank you, Rick Walker, for hosting this on the Maverick News Channel tonight.
Oh, thank you for all that you do. You are a master at bringing people together and facilitating these things. And you are also an ambassador and a diplomat. And I appreciate you for that.
Maybe I should get a new job at the United Nations.
Oh, no, you're not allowed to leave. You have to stay here.
That's right. Maybe Canada could use me somehow.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're doing us all a service right where you are. So,
thank you, Rick. Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching tonight. We appreciate everyone who tuned in. Please hit that like button. That helps us with the YouTube algorithm, because YouTube hates us. They do. They hate us.
Yeah, Facebook too.
I think the internet hates us today. You noticed I disappeared for a while during the broadcast.
Yeah.
I got kicked out of StreamYard. I don't know what the heck happened. I got kicked out. It said there's some kind of issue. Try again, and I had to try a couple of times just to get back in to the conversation. I thought you were mad at me, kicked me out, but I knew you weren't.
Very weird stuff lately.
Weird day today, and I'm glad that we were able to pull that off, because we were wondering if this was all going to work technically. Once again, Maverick News is under attack. We are demonetized permanently on YouTube. So if you enjoyed this roundtable, if you enjoy our election coverage and other things that we do, I hope that you will support us with a donation or a monthly membership. And you can do that at freedomreporters.com and support independent journalists like us who are trying to bring you the real news. We're putting our heart and soul into this, and a lot of hours out of our day. But we love it. We do it because we love it. We do it because we love our countries. We love this world, and we don't want to see it go up in a ball of flames. So please help us save journalism and help us save the world. And once again, thank you, Rick. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And I'll see you back here Saturday night for Strange Bedfellows, when we will have our good friend Caleb Maupin from CPI and RT Television. He'll be back Saturday night with us, and filmmaker and author Peter Coffin, one of my favorites. They just had a big anti-imperialist event in New York City this week, and they're going to bring us some footage and tell us all about it. So this will be a lot of fun. We look forward to having Caleb Maupin back on the show.
Yeah, and tell people how they can find you on your other platforms too, Laurie.
You can find me, for the time being, on YouTube until they kick me off again, at Strange Bedfellows Podcast here on YouTube. You can find me on Rumble, Lori Spencer, and Twitter at that little thingy right there. This says Real Lori Spencer down there at the bottom of the screen. And I tweet a lot. They call me She Tweets a Lot. That's my Indian name. I'm in Oklahoma. Everybody's got an Indian name, so She Tweets a Lot.
You do. You're a master at Twitter, and I suck at it.
I talk too much, but Twitter seems to like what I have to say, at least for now. That's the one platform that never censored me. I will say Twitter never kicked me off their platform, never throttled me, never shadow banned me. Twitter's been very good to me, but I've been kicked off everywhere else. Facebook, I'm gone. Zuckerberg hates me because he didn't like my reporting on the war. Or rather, I should say, let's be honest, it's the Biden administration. Somebody in the Biden administration is not a fan of my work, and they have sent out, my name must be on a list. And I'm just waiting for when we get the YouTube files. I'm waiting for that because my name's going to be on it. Guaranteed.
Well, that's okay. It's just something to be proud of.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
Aren't you?
A badge of honor.
Yeah.
Yeah. As our ban on Facebook continues.
We are still banned on Facebook too, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. I have only limited access because I was a bad boy and I don't even know what I did.
No, they never tell you.
No.
They never tell you.
And then they say, if you'd like to appeal, you can appeal.
Yeah, good luck with that.
What am I appealing other than you just took us down? That's it.
How do you appeal when you don't know what you did?
Right.
Yeah. I thought it was only a 3-day ban. Did they find a way to extend it like they do?
A month.
Oh, now it's see, that's what they do.
Yeah.
Starts as 3 days. Then at the end of your 3 days, they find another reason to ban you. And then they expand the ban, and 30 days becomes 90 days. And then it just becomes permanent. And they never tell you what you did wrong.
Yeah. Well, my attitude is they don't deserve us. So
yeah, that's right.
They're lost.
So
really.
there.
Look at the numbers we had tonight. We still had a big audience, and we didn't need Facebook. I'm able to post little things on just one page right now. I can't do the other things, but you know, I still put up a promo for tonight's broadcast, and they just all go over to Rumble. That's all.
I love seeing more people watching on Rumble.
Yeah.
We typically these days we have a bigger audience on Rumble than we do on YouTube, and I think that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to see more of that, please.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody who has subscribed over there, and thank you to everybody for just tuning in, watching tonight, and being part of everything we're doing here. And if you haven't subscribed, come on over and join the Maverick family.
Please do.
And we'll be
we
back.
love our Maverick family.
And I'll be back tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then Lori will be back here on Saturday evening with
See you then.
Strange Bedfellows.
Good
Catch
night,
y'all on the
everybody.
flip side.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.